What if the voice in your head wasn't really yours? What if every memory you hold is a story your brain rewrote the last time you recalled it? What if the very moment you call, now, is already gone? And what if free will, your sense of choice, is nothing more than a convincing illusion played out on the stage of biology? These aren't wild theories, they're unsettling truths, backed by neuroscience, psychology, and even quantum physics. Over the next 4 hours, we're going to pull apart the seams of perception, expose the blind spots of consciousness, and explore the strange design flaws built into the human mind. So, if you're ready to question your thoughts, doubt your choices, and watch reality itself bend beneath you, tap like, hit subscribe, and step inside the hidden architecture of the self, where nothing is as it seems. The simulation hypothesis, questioning reality in a digital universe. What if the reality you wake up to every day, the firmness of the ground beneath your feet, the warmth of sunlight on your skin, the sound of your own voice bouncing back at you was not as real as you believe? Most of us trust in the stability of the world, not because we've verified its truth, but because its patterns repeat. You expect walls to stay upright, gravity to keep pulling, and time to keep ticking forward. But constancy is not the same as certainty. It could just as easily be the clever mask of something artificial, a digital architecture so flawless it convinces you it was never designed. Imagine that everything you know, the streets you walk, the strangers you pass, even the stars overhead, wasn't grown from chaos or divine order, but rendered by code in real time. That's the unsettling idea behind the simulation hypothesis, the belief that our universe may not be natural, but programmed. This isn't science fiction pulled from movies. It's a possibility considered seriously by philosophers and physicists alike. The suspicion begins when you notice the rules of reality. For instance, why is there a smallest measurable length, the Planck scale, beyond which nothing smaller seems to exist? It feels suspiciously like pixels in a cosmic screen. Why does the universe enforce a maximum speed, the speed of light, as though information is throttled, unable to update faster? Why does quantum physics suggest that particles exist in multiple states until they're observed, collapsing into reality only when watched? In games, environments aren't fully rendered until players turn their gaze. It's efficient, logical, and eerily similar to how our universe appears to function. These aren't definitive proofs, but they sound more like programming limitations than natural inevitabilities. If reality is coded, then what does that make us? Players or NPCs, conscious agents or scripted constructs? Walking through a forest, feeling leaves crunch and sunlight spill through the branches, you'd never suspect the trees didn't exist a moment before you turned your head. Yet that is exactly how games work. Unseen details aren't fully built until needed. Schrödinger's cat, both alive and dead until observed, suddenly feels less like a puzzle about physics and more like a metaphor for computational economy. Why would a system calculate every possibility at once when it can simply wait until the outcome is required? Quantum uncertainty, usually presented as a strange law of nature, becomes easier to digest when framed as optimization. This view is both fascinating and terrifying. If the universe is simulated, then its order, its elegance, its perfect mathematical descriptions aren't mysterious, they're deliberate, like the parameters of a program. The fine-tuning of physics, which seems improbably suited for life, could be intentional settings rather than cosmic coincidence. But the bigger, darker question is, why? If someone or something built this universe, what was the goal? Perhaps we are an experiment, a curiosity, a performance for a distant audience. Or maybe the architects left long ago, the system running unattended like an abandoned server in some forgotten corner of existence. Worse still, maybe we are monitored constantly, every decision logged, every emotion analyzed by entities whose intelligence is so far beyond ours that words like freedom and privacy were never anything but illusions. Free will is one of the first casualties under this lens. The comforting belief that you choose tea over coffee, kindness over cruelty, or love over loneliness may be nothing more than pre-written code playing out. Maybe our sense of choice is itself a designed feature, an elegant trick to keep us stable. Simulated minds that feel free are easier to maintain. They resist collapse, they adapt, they keep the program running smoothly. If this is true, then even rebellion, even individuality, is part of the script. But not everyone finds despair in this idea. Some argue that if the simulation feels real, then it is real at least for us. If you laugh, suffer, hope, or grieve, does it matter if those emotions are the side effect of neurons or of code? For some, the hypothesis is strangely liberating. It suggests that rules are not unbreakable, but hackable. Death may not be an erasure but a reset. Suffering may not be destiny but a condition of the framework. If the world is built, then maybe it can be rebuilt. This isn't proof of immortality or miracles, but it reframes existence as a system that can be learned and, possibly, influenced. Seen this way, ordinary experiences take on new meaning. Déjà vu becomes a glitch in rendering, intuition a glimpse of background code bubbling up, dreams a debug environment where fragments of reality are tested and rearranged. Even irrational feelings begin to make sense as signals leaking from a deeper architecture. The uncanny no longer feels inexplicable but expected, like a seam in the scenery of a game that was never meant to be noticed. What's crucial here is not the conclusion whether the simulation hypothesis is true, but the shift in perspective it offers. Instead of asking endlessly, "Is this real?" the better question might be, "What can I do with this?" Because even if you adjust code, you still experience the richness of thought, emotion, and choice. Awareness itself becomes proof of a kind of authenticity. Whether we are organic or artificial, the pain of loss and the wonder of discovery still shape who we are. Meaning, then, doesn't vanish in a simulated world, it becomes something we generate deliberately. Like particles collapsing into definite states, meaning comes into existence only when we decide it does. So when you wake up tomorrow and glance at the ceiling, debating whether it's authentic or simulated, remember, the ceiling doesn't matter. What matters is what you do beneath it, the choices you lean into, the patterns you weave, the signals you send out into the noise. Because even in a universe of code, you are the one running it. Intention, awareness, and creativity are not diminished by the possibility of simulation. If anything, they become more powerful. For in a world that may be fabricated, the one undeniable truth is how you choose to live inside it. On science by the evidence. Decades ago, astronomers noticed something puzzling when they tracked how galaxies spin. Stars at the outer edges were moving far too quickly, behaving as if galaxies contained much more mass than we could see. By the known laws of gravity, those galaxies should have torn themselves apart. But they didn't. Something unseen, a hidden structure, was holding them together. To explain it, scientists proposed dark matter, not dark because it's shadowy, but because it refuses to interact with light at all. It neither reflects nor absorbs. It simply reveals itself through its gravitational grip. Without this invisible glue, the cosmic web that stretches across billions of light years would unravel. If dark matter startled us, dark energy unsettled us even more. In the late 1990s, astronomers expected to confirm that cosmic expansion was slowing down after the Big Bang, as gravity gradually pulled everything back. Instead, they found the opposite. The universe is accelerating, expanding faster and faster as if some repulsive force is embedded in space itself. This mysterious push, which now seems to make up about 68% of the universe's total energy, was named dark energy. Unlike dark matter, which pulls matter together, dark energy pushes everything apart. It is a cosmic anti-gravity, vast and silent, driving galaxies away from each other at increasing speed. Together, dark matter and dark energy dominate reality, yet they remain enigmas. Their existence is inferred not by direct detection but through their effects. Gravitational lensing shows light bending around invisible mass. Galaxy formation simulations collapse unless dark matter is included. The cosmic microwave background carries delicate fluctuations that point to both forces woven into its fabric. This is not superstition. It is evidence. But it is indirect. Like hearing footsteps in an empty room, you know someone is there, even if you can't see them. And here lies the unsettling beauty of the problem. Our most advanced theories work only if we accept that most of the universe is hidden. We, the luminous few, are just sparks flickering on the surface of something far larger and stranger. It's as if we're reading a novel where only every 20th page is visible, yet the story somehow still makes sense. What is missing isn't an afterthought. It is the foundation of everything we know. Some researchers imagine dark matter as exotic particles, WIMPs, axions, sterile neutrinos. Elaborate underground detectors have been built to catch them, buried deep to escape interference. But year after year, the results return empty. No collisions, no signals, only silence. Others suspect the problem isn't unseen matter at all, but a flaw in our understanding of gravity itself. Maybe the law we thought was universal is only an approximation. With dark energy, the mystery is even deeper. Perhaps it's the energy of the vacuum itself, or perhaps something beyond any concept we currently have. Some theorists whisper about multiverses, others about cosmic illusions born of perspective. The more we search, the stranger the answers become. What does this mean for us, fragile beings made of the rare 5% that interacts with light? Are we accidents of physics, anomalies flickering briefly before vanishing? Or are we the tips of vast icebergs, connected to a sea of hidden substance we cannot yet name? To me, the haunting part is not only that we don't know but that our ignorance might be permanent. The universe could be operating under rules designed to remain partly veiled, to force curiosity without ever granting full disclosure. Yet this uncertainty is not a failure. It may be the very essence of science. Mystery is not a gap in knowledge to be ashamed of, it is the fuel that keeps us searching. Dark matter and dark energy remind us that reality is not exhausted by what our senses or instruments can measure. They force us to reconsider what we call real. If something shapes galaxies, bends light, and accelerates the expansion of space, is it less real because we can't hold it in our hands? Perhaps reality should be defined not only by what can be seen, but by what exerts influence, what leaves a trace. From this perspective, our place in the cosmos becomes strangely poetic. We are sparks of awareness, built from the rare substance that glimmers, yet utterly dependent on the invisible ocean in which we float. You are a child of stardust, yes, but also a creature bound by forces you will never directly touch. The irony is striking. We, the visible few, spend our lives trying to illuminate the invisible many. Maybe that's the deeper purpose of the missing universe, not to frustrate us, but to humble us. To remind us that knowledge is not ownership, that existence cannot be reduced to what fits in a telescope or a laboratory. The silence of dark matter, the evasiveness of dark energy, might be the universe's way of teaching that reality is larger than certainty. That discovery is less about answers and more about the courage to keep asking questions. So the next time you stare at the stars, remember that they are exceptions, not the rule. They are the visible punctuation in a story mostly written in invisible ink. And you are part of that story, a brief awareness carved out of the rarest matter, surrounded by an ocean of absence. You are built from light yet shaped by darkness. Perhaps existence itself means shining for a moment in contrast to the unknown, finding meaning not in conquering mystery but in being illuminated by it. In that sense, the missing universe is not a flaw in the cosmos, it is an invitation to wonder. The silent wall between minds, why you'll never truly know if anyone else is conscious. One of the strangest facts about being human is that you can only be certain of your own awareness. You know what it feels like to be you, to hunger, to fear, to remember, to hope. Yet when you look at another person, even the one you love most, you can't step into their head and feel what they feel. All you can do is watch gestures, hear words, interpret faces, and assume there's something alive behind the skin. This is the so-called problem of other minds. Philosophers have debated it for centuries, and neuroscientists have tried to measure their way around it, but the conclusion remains unsettling. There's no method, no test, no technology that can prove another person is conscious. You can measure brain activity or emotional responses, but those are signals, not the experience itself. They're like dashboard lights, not the journey on the road. Think about standing at night in front of a window. Behind you, the room is dark, but outside, a whole city glows with lit windows. You see silhouettes moving, lines shifting, shadows crossing, but you never hear the voices. You never step into those lives. You know there are people there, but but you don't experience their inner worlds. That's exactly how we live every day, glimpsing surfaces, never touching the private stream of awareness within another being. And once you realize this, the world can feel strangely hollow, like a stage full of brilliant actors. Their performances may be flawless smiles, tears, laughter, but you'll never know with certainty if they're simply moving through motions, like machines programmed to act alive. This isn't science fiction paranoia, it's a built-in blind spot of consciousness itself. No matter how much empathy you feel, you don't literally enter someone else's experience. You only mirror it. When someone suffers, you remember your own pain and project it onto them. When they smile, you simulate the joy inside yourself. But projection, no matter how convincing, is not access. Even in the closest intimacy, the most overwhelming grief, the deepest love, you remain sealed in your own skull. The bridge between minds is not knowledge, it's trust. And trust is fragile precisely because it is unverifiable. This gap between knowing yourself and guessing about others has fascinated not only philosophers but also scientists. Behaviorists once believed consciousness could be ignored because only behavior mattered. Cognitive science tried to map thought into information patterns, and modern neuroscience looks for neural correlates of awareness. But every method, no matter how advanced, stops at the same wall, measuring signals, never the actual subjective feeling. We can point to neurons firing when someone is in pain, but that doesn't tell us what it feels like to them. We can watch language centers light up, but that doesn't let us step into their inner narrative. And so we're left with a haunting possibility. What if you're the only one who truly experiences? What if everyone else, your partner, your family, your friends, is only performing, with no awareness behind the mask? Machines can already mimic emotion. Actors can cry on cue without grief. Parrots can repeat human words. If imitation is possible without feeling, then appearance alone can't prove consciousness. That thought is disturbing because it unravels the foundation of how we relate to one another. We build our lives on the assumption that others are like us, that behind their eyes is a subjectivity like ours. Remove that assumption, and the entire architecture of love, morality, and meaning collapses. Yet here's the paradox. While you can never prove another mind exists, you must act as if it does. Otherwise, society disintegrates. Imagine living as though everyone else were an automaton until proven conscious. You'd never trust, never love, never bother to comfort someone in pain. Ethics itself would evaporate, because it's built on recognizing others as centers of experience. The inability to prove consciousness doesn't free you from responsibility, it forces you into a moral stance. You choose to believe, not because it's logically airtight, but because sanity depends on it. Think of it like walking into a room of mirrors. Each person reflects signals of life, language, emotion, gesture, but behind every reflection lies uncertainty. Some mirrors may contain real awareness, others maybe not. You'll never know for sure. But what makes us human is not uncovering absolute proof, but extending trust despite the void. It's saying, I don't know if you feel, but I will act as if you do. That leap of faith creates connection where certainty cannot. And there's something profoundly beautiful about that leap. Because the very fact that you feel awareness inside yourself makes you part of a rare phenomenon. The universe is full of rivers, storms, galaxies, and explosions, all magnificent, all blind. But consciousness is a flicker of subjectivity that lets reality look back at itself. You are a mirror angled inward, an aperture through which existence gains perspective. Even if you are the only one who has it, that fact is extraordinary. But more likely, you are not alone. Behind other eyes, hidden from your direct access, there are countless other windows glowing in the night. This realization shifts how we live. Every smile you see, every hand you hold, every voice you listen to may be more than a performance, it may be a portal to another center of experience as vivid and rich as yours. That possibility alone demands respect. It is why we treat others with care, why we choose kindness, why love carries weight. Because to love someone is to say, I cannot know your mind, but I believe it's there, and that belief is enough to bind us. So yes, you'll never truly know if anyone else is conscious. But that doesn't mean the world is hollow. It means the world is filled with mirrors. each one reflecting possibility. Some may only be reflections. Others may hide lives as intricate as yours. And the only way forward is to act as if they do, to keep speaking, trusting, and believing. Because without that faith, life becomes unlivable. But with it, consciousness, though unprovable, becomes the foundation for meaning. And maybe that's the deepest truth. You don't need certainty to make life real. You just need hope that somewhere, behind another pair of eyes, someone is looking back at you. The brain's theater. Why imagination feels real. The human brain is often thought of as a recording device, faithfully capturing what happens in the outside world. But that's a flawed picture. The truth is more radical. Your brain cannot perfectly distinguish between what you physically experience and what you vividly imagine. Picture a candle flame in your mind. No real fire exists, yet your pupils adjust as if light were present, and your skin might sense phantom warmth. What you just did wasn't metaphorical, it was neurological. Functional brain scans reveal that imagining an object, an action, or even a memory activates nearly the same regions that would light up if you were actually encountering it. The firing of neurons, the release of chemicals into your bloodstream, the changes in your heartbeat, all of it mirrors reality. To your brain, imagination isn't child's play. It's rehearsal, a simulation that it takes seriously. Once you recognize this, you start questioning how much of your life is based not on the world outside, but on the internal movies your mind is constantly projecting. Think of the brain less like a camera and more like a theater. In this theater, every sense is a performance put together from memory, expectation, and prediction. You don't just see reality, you interpret and construct it. Light enters your eyes, sound vibrates in your ears, but before these signals ever reach you, they're edited and narrated. Your brain adds context. This is safe. That's a threat. This reminds you of last time. And astonishingly, the brain sometimes skips external input entirely and creates its own script, a dream, a memory, a fear. And it reacts to these inner creations as though they were unfolding in real time. This explains why a nightmare can leave you trembling, why a single memory can bring tears, why picturing rejection can trigger genuine physical pain. To the brain, activation is truth. If the circuits fire, the experience is real. This blurring between imagination and reality helps explain countless aspects of human life. Trauma can leave lasting scars not visible on the body, because the mind continues replaying events until they feel permanent. The placebo effect works because believing in healing activates genuine biological pathways. Anticipating pain often feels almost as agonizing as experiencing it. None of this is mystical, it's a function of how our nervous system is wired. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reshape itself, doesn't care whether the input is real or imagined. Vivid visualization strengthens neural pathways just as practice in the real world does. That's why athletes rehearse victories in their minds, why therapists encourage visualization of resilience, and why meditation taps into imagery as much as breath. Thoughts become things not because of magic, but because repeated mental rehearsal conditions the brain to expect, prepare for, and gravitate toward specific outcomes. But this ability is a double-edged sword. Just as imagination can prepare us for courage, healing, or growth, it can also trap us in cycles of fear, self-doubt, and anxiety. The brain can loop insults until they scar, fabricate dangers until the body freezes, or spin worst-case scenarios so vividly that you live them as though they already happened. Deep anxiety is the brain's simulation mechanism run wild, convincing the nervous system of threats that don't exist outside the mind. And your body pays the cost: exhaustion, stress, despair. This doesn't mean you're weak or broken. It means your nervous system is faithfully responding to what your imagination insists is real. Unless you step into the role of director, your brain will continue replaying these movies unchecked. Consider everyday examples. Someone gives you a glance you interpret as hostile. Whether or not hostility exists, your body may respond with defensiveness or sadness. Anticipate failure before a presentation, and your brain may trigger stress hormones that make mistakes more likely. Longing for someone, your imagination fills the gaps with conversations, future reunions, or vivid flashbacks, each stirring joy, grief, or desire. None of this is fake. Your nervous system doesn't verify events against external reality, it only checks if they're happening internally. If the answer is yes, your body reacts. Hormones shift, muscles tense, thoughts spiral. This is why imagination is both a gift and a responsibility. You can live dozens of lifetimes in your head, some exhilarating, others terrifying. And while much of this seems wasteful, it's actually how the brain learns. Simulation is preparation, prediction, and adaptation. The problem arises when rehearsal becomes performance, when fears loop endlessly, and when imagination shapes reality without awareness. If you don't intervene, your reflexive mental theater can script a life of avoidance, anxiety, or despair. But here's the empowering truth. Because the brain responds to imagination as it does to reality, you can use this to your advantage. You can deliberately rehearse courage, resilience, and healing. Athletes have long relied on mental imagery, not just to refine movements but to regulate confidence. Therapists use visualization to help clients reframe trauma or build coping strategies. Meditation teaches the mind to direct attention toward calm, compassion, or presence. You don't need external proof to begin. What you need is focus, repetition, and intention. The stories you rehearse become the scaffolding of your identity. What makes this powerful is the feedback loop it creates. Your perceptions shape your actions shape your outcomes, and outcomes reinforce beliefs. The cycle can trap you in fear or free you into growth. Imagine deliberately picturing yourself not as perfect, but simply as someone willing to try again after setbacks. That alone can tilt the script toward progress. Your brain may not perfectly separate imagination from reality, but your life is molded by both. By steering the simulations in your head, you shape the world you actually live in. So the next time your mind replays painful scenes or whispers failure before you've even begun, remember, your brain is not trying to sabotage you, it's trying to protect you, to simulate survival. It simply doesn't always know what deserves priority. That choice is yours. You are the director in this theater. You decide which simulations get the spotlight, which ones fade to black. Imagination will never be silent, but it can be guided. When steered with awareness, it becomes one of the most powerful tools for shaping reality, not by magic, but by the very architecture of the brain. The illusion of reality, how your brain rewrites the world. What if I told you that nothing you see, hear, or remember is actually the world itself? That every color, every sound, and every memory is not a direct recording but a carefully reconstructed simulation inside your head. This isn't science fiction, it's neuroscience. Your brain is not a window to reality. It's an artist, an interpreter, and sometimes even a trickster, crafting a story convincing enough to keep you alive. The unsettling truth is that you've never encountered the world directly. You've only experienced your brain's best guess of it. Think about color for a moment. When you look at a ripe strawberry, you might say, it's red. But in reality, there is no red in the strawberry itself. The strawberry only reflects certain wavelengths of light. Your eyes detect those wavelengths, and your brain assigns the label, red. The redness you see exists only in your perception, not in the fruit. In other words, the world doesn't come pre-packaged with color, you do. The same deception applies to sound. When you hear a bird sing, you're not directly perceiving the bird's voice. What actually reaches you are shifts in air pressure, subtle vibrations in the environment. Your ears convert those vibrations into electrical impulses, and your brain translates them into song. What you hear is not the bird, it's your brain's story about the bird. And that goes for every sense you rely on: touch, taste, smell, sight. They are all translations, not direct connections. But the illusion deepens, because your brain isn't just translating raw data, it's constantly filling in missing pieces. You think you see a seamless reality, but in truth, your visual system has blind spots. Your brain smooths over these gaps without your awareness. When you blink, you don't notice a momentary blackout because your brain invents continuity, stitching together fragments into a fluid narrative. You feel like you're watching a perfectly edited movie, but the raw footage is messy, incomplete, and noisy. The brain is doing real-time editing before you ever become aware of the scene. And this editing is not neutral. It's influenced by emotions, memories, expectations, and context. Two people can witness the same event yet describe two completely different realities, not because either is lying, but because each brain reconstructed the moment differently. This is why eyewitness testimony in court is notoriously unreliable. It's not just that people forget, it's that every recollection is a rebuilt version, slightly altered from the last. In fact, every time you recall a memory, you're not replaying a recording, you're reconstructing it. You piece together fragments of sensory detail, emotion, and prior retellings. And in that process, the memory can change, drifting further from what originally happened. This is why your most vivid childhood memories feel so real yet may contain elements that never occurred. They are collages your brain has refined, edited, and sometimes distorted. Evolution shaped us this way deliberately. Human beings were never designed to see objective truth. Instead, we evolved to detect what mattered for survival: food, threats, social signals. If a sound in the bushes might be a predator, it's safer for the brain to exaggerate danger than to perceive reality with perfect neutrality. Evolution optimized our senses for efficiency, not accuracy. In other words, your brain gives you a user interface, not the raw code of the universe. Just like dragging a folder to the trash on your computer doesn't show you the complex rewriting of data on the hard drive, your experience of reality is an icon-based interface. It hides the complex, incomprehensible mechanics beneath. This is why people often live in different realities even when they share the same world. Political divides, personal arguments, cultural disagreements, they're not just conflicts of opinion. They're clashes between entirely different reconstructions. Each brain edits the raw inputs differently, leading to different versions of truth that feel absolutely correct to each person. Now here's where it gets both frightening and liberating. If all perception is reconstruction, then nothing you experience is fully reliable. The anger you feel, the fear that grips you, or even the admiration you hold for someone may not reflect what's really happening. They reflect the story your brain has built. This doesn't make your feelings invalid, but it does make them worth questioning. Is this anger about the event itself, or about my interpretation of it? Is this fear triggered by real danger, or by my brain's projection of danger? The act of questioning creates cracks in the illusion, and in those cracks lies freedom. Because if perception is constructed, then perception can be reshaped. You may not be able to change reality itself, but you can influence how your brain reconstructs it. This is the foundation of mindfulness, cognitive therapy, and even creative expression. When you meditate, you're not escaping reality, you're training your brain to edit its reconstruction differently. When an artist paints, they're not showing the real world, but rather their unique edited version of it. Awareness of the reconstruction process gives you some power over it. You are not simply a passive observer, you are an active storyteller with editorial control. But this awareness also comes with humility. You must accept that certainty is fragile, that what you know might be only what your brain has decided to show you. That realization can soften judgment, reduce conflict, and expand empathy. Because if everyone is walking around inside their own reconstructed movie, it makes sense that we rarely see the same film. Imagine walking into a room and immediately feeling rejected. Is that rejection really happening? Or is it your brain reconstructing subtle cues through the lens of past insecurities? By pausing to ask, is this reality, or my reconstruction of it? You can break the illusion's hold. You might still feel the emotion, but you won't be its prisoner. And that small shift can change everything. In the end, your brain was never designed to show you truth. Its mission is survival, but your mission, once you understand this, can be different. You can aim to see more clearly, not to uncover ultimate reality which may always be out of reach, but to recognize the lens through which you see. Every thought, sensation, and memory is a construction, a story being told to you by you. And once you know you're the storyteller, you can write the story more consciously. Frame by frame, thought by thought, you can reshape how you engage with the world. Not to escape it, but to meet it more honestly, with curiosity and humility. Because reality itself may remain unknowable, but your perception of it, your reconstruction is yours to question, examine, and transform. And sometimes, that awareness is enough to change everything. Living in delay. Why you never truly experience the present. What if I told you that every single moment of your life is already history by the time you notice it? That the present you think you're living in is never quite real, but always a fraction of a second late. Imagine you're watching a live sports event on TV with a tiny delay, so small you wouldn't even detect it. The ball is already in the net before you cheer. The crowd has already erupted before you even hear the noise. That's not just a broadcasting glitch, that's your life. Every single thing you perceive has already occurred. You live in delay, not in some metaphorical sense, but in a literal, biological one. Your brain is a delayed broadcast of reality, showing you a highlight reel stitched together just enough to convince you it's happening now. By the time you see a gesture, a smile, a hand moving toward you, it's already gone. You are always late to your own life. And this isn't some strange malfunction of the mind, it's how the human brain is wired. Think about what happens when light hits your eyes. Photons bounce off objects, pass through your cornea, and finally strike the retina. That physical input is then converted into electrical signals, which race through the optic nerve into your brain. Only then does the brain begin its real work, decoding patterns, comparing them with memory, filling in gaps, discarding noise, and finally presenting you with a picture you can consciously register. That whole chain takes roughly 80 milliseconds. Doesn't sound like much, right? But in the rhythm of reality, 80 milliseconds is enough to ensure that what you think is the present is always already the past. You never see the punch as it lands, only where it was a moment before. You don't watch the bird fly, you see the echo of its wings. Even the words that leave your mouth were chosen long before you became aware of the impulse to speak. Your brain starts constructing them and then, after the fact, sends you the memo that says, you decided this. You're not the driver in real time, you're the commentator, narrating events already underway. At first, this feels like a disturbing revelation. If we're always living in delay, are we really in control at all? Or are we simply watching the movie of our own lives, reacting to edits and cuts we never chose? Neuroscience adds another layer to this strangeness. Before you make a voluntary movement, your brain's motor cortex shows electrical activity called the readiness potential. This activity begins milliseconds before you consciously decide to act. In other words, your brain launches the action, and then your consciousness creates a story to explain why you chose it. Free will feels like authorship, but in reality, it's closer to commentary. You aren't the director, you're the announcer who comes in after the play has already happened. Athletes unknowingly reveal how deep this delay runs. A baseball player facing a 95 miles per hour fastball doesn't actually have time to see the ball, process its trajectory, and swing in response. The math doesn't work out. Instead, the brain predicts the outcome based on experience. The batter doesn't hit the ball in reaction to its flight, he swings toward a forecast, a guess about where the ball will be. When the guess is right, it feels like magic reflexes. When it's wrong, the swing looks foolish. But the truth is, in both cases, the player isn't reacting to the present at all. He's acting on a constructed future. And that's what all of us are doing, constantly. The brain is a prediction machine. It blends fragments of past experiences with best guesses about what must be happening right now, then presents this blend as the present. This raises unsettling questions about what we call perception. Is your experience of reality even reality, or is it a smoothed-out fiction crafted by the brain to keep you functioning? Neuroscience suggests the latter. Your brain sacrifices accuracy for coherence. It edits time to make the world feel seamless, even if that means bending truth. A sudden jolt of fear illustrates this perfectly. When you hear a loud crash in the dark, your body jumps before your mind knows what's happening. Only later does your brain supply a story. That looked like a shadow, or that sounded like a snake. The explanation comes after the reaction, yet you believe you knew why you moved. That belief isn't truth, it's your brain's after-the-fact rationalization, an illusion to make your world feel orderly. Now, zoom out beyond single reactions and think about daily life. If every perception is already delayed, then every judgment built on those perceptions is slightly skewed. The way you interpret someone's tone, the way you read their face, even the way you assess your own emotions, all of it is based on information already expired. You're always slightly behind, piecing together meaning from echoes of reality. That means our relationships, choices, and beliefs are stitched together from lagging data, yet we live as though they are fresh and immediate. This doesn't make life false, but it does make it narrative. Life isn't the raw present, it's the story of what just happened, replayed as if it's unfolding right now. So what does this mean for free will, for meaning, for how we live? On one hand, it can be anxiety-inducing. If we're always behind, always reacting to the ghost of reality, how can we trust our choices? But on the other hand, this awareness can be liberating. The delay gives us space. If our first reaction is always a step behind, that means we can pause before acting, recalibrate, and make the next step more intentional. Recognizing the lag shifts us from obsession with instant perfection toward patience with imperfection. Metaphorically, it's like being in a soundproof train. You see the scenery sliding by, but you don't hear the speed, don't feel the raw rush of motion. The ride feels smoother than it really is. Occasionally, the train jolts, reminding you that you're moving far faster than your senses reveal. Reality is the train, perception is the passenger. You are always a little behind the curve, but knowing that doesn't weaken the experience. In fact, it sharpens it. By realizing that every now you live is already a then, you cultivate humility and curiosity. You stop assuming your perceptions are absolute truth and start treating them as interpretations. The delay, once understood, becomes not a flaw but a mirror. It shows you how your mind constructs the world, and that insight makes you more forgiving of yourself, of others, of the strange lag in human experience. You're not broken, you're not behind, you're simply human, wired for meaning, not immediacy. And once you accept that, you stop chasing the present as if you can ever catch it. Instead, you become aware of the rhythm between past and prediction, illusion and truth. And in that awareness, you find something closer to freedom. The fine-tuned universe, why reality seems built for consciousness. The idea that our universe might be fine-tuned for conscious life is one of the strangest and most unsettling concepts in modern thought. Imagine for a moment a colossal vault filled with endless dials and switches, each one corresponding to a fundamental constant of nature. One knob adjusts gravity, another controls the charge of the electron, another sets the speed at which space itself expands. Each dial must be tuned with an unimaginable precision, a level of accuracy far beyond anything humans could ever engineer. Now imagine that, against astronomical odds, this cosmic safe has been cracked not by accident but in perfect alignment to allow life, not only stars and planets, but awareness, thought, and you sitting here listening to this idea. And in that realization, the question erupts. Is this an extraordinary accident, or is it a sign? Fine-tuning refers to this remarkable balance in the physical constants. Physics textbooks present numbers like the gravitational constant or the speed of light as fixed. Yet they could, in principle, have been otherwise. And here's the catch. Even a microscopic adjustment in these values would render the universe sterile. If gravity was slightly stronger, stars would consume themselves too quickly. If weaker, stars would never ignite. If the strong nuclear force varied just a bit, atoms would not hold together. If the expansion rate after the Big Bang had been a fraction faster, matter would have scattered before galaxies could form. We live inside a universe that has been balanced like a pencil standing on its tip for billions of years and somehow it hasn't fallen. That's not mystical exaggeration. It's a recognized problem in cosmology. The constants appear suspiciously well arranged, not simply for any universe, but for one capable of birthing observers. This leads us to a shocking implication. The laws of nature not only allow atoms, they permit experiences love, curiosity, joy, grief, reflection. It's one thing to have a universe that forms planets. It's another to have a universe that gives rise to Mozart's music, Shakespeare's words, or the laughter of a child. And once you grasp this, you can't help but feel unsettled. Why would a reality so vast and indifferent arrange itself to be so delicately compatible with consciousness? Scientists offer possible answers. The most popular is the multiverse theory, the idea that there are countless universes, each with different constants. Most of them are barren, but ours just happens to be one of the rare winning tickets. In this view, our astonishment is misplaced. Of course we find ourselves in a life-friendly universe. Fish shouldn't be surprised by water, because they couldn't exist outside of it. The anthropic principle explains it neatly. If the universe weren't capable of supporting consciousness, we wouldn't be here asking these questions. But while this explanation makes logical sense, it feels unsatisfying. It avoids the mystery without really dissolving it. Why is it that out of all the universes, this one doesn't just barely scrape by but flourishes with beauty, complexity, and self-awareness? Another possibility is that there are deeper physical laws waiting to be uncovered, laws that make our constants inevitable rather than arbitrary. Perhaps gravity, electromagnetism, and the nuclear forces had no other possible values. But if that's the case, the question only shifts: why those deeper laws? Why that specific framework that leads to minds and meaning? Each answer pushes the riddle one layer deeper, like peeling back an onion that never ends. There's also the suggestion, almost forbidden in scientific circles, that the universe may in some sense be designed, though not necessarily by a god in the traditional sense. Maybe consciousness is not an accidental byproduct of matter, but a goal toward which matter was always moving. Perhaps reality has always been tilted toward awareness, as if atoms secretly longed to become brains. That idea sounds poetic, even mystical, but it arises naturally when you consider just how delicate the conditions are. The metaphor often used is tuning a violin. If even one string is off, the melody collapses. Our universe plays in exquisite harmony, not only by having instruments but by producing a song, and that song has the strange property of being able to hear itself. This interpretation transforms how we see ourselves. If consciousness is essential rather than incidental, then we are not trivial specks lost in cosmic indifference. We are the means by which the universe observes and reflects upon itself. You are not merely chemistry in motion. You are chemistry that woke up. Physics becomes poetry in you. Biology becomes curiosity. Matter becomes meaning. Still, skepticism remains. Many scientists insist that invoking purpose or meaning crosses into metaphysics. Perhaps they're right. Maybe we'll never know whether fine-tuning points to a deeper design or whether we simply drew the lucky card. But consider this analogy. You wake up in a locked room. The air is breathable, the temperature comfortable, there's food on the table, and a book written in your language. You could chalk it up to luck, that the room just happens to fit your needs. But the longer you look, the harder it is to shake the feeling that the room was arranged with you in mind. That's the strange tension of fine-tuning, the suspicion that the universe feels less like a random room and more like an invitation. Even the anthropic principle doesn't completely dissolve this suspicion. Yes, of course we could only exist in a universe capable of sustaining life. But that doesn't explain why the fit is not only sufficient but elegant. The equations that govern galaxies also govern atoms. The same forces that allow stars to shine make chemistry possible, which in turn makes biology possible. There is symmetry, beauty, a unifying architecture that seems less like accident and more like art. If consciousness is indeed part of that architecture, then your existence is not a meaningless glitch. It's a culmination. You are the lens through which reality contemplates itself, the moment when equations learn to ask questions, when stardust discovers wonder. Your thoughts and your questions ripple backward through time, tethered to the very birth of the cosmos. They are part of the same mystery that tuned the constants with such improbable delicacy. Of course, none of this settles the question. Maybe everything really is coincidence, the greatest accident in the history of everything. But if that's true, it's a staggeringly meaningful accident, one that gave rise to art, love, and curiosity. And if it's not an accident, if there is some purpose woven into the fabric of existence, then every breath you take, every act of kindness, every moment of awareness is part of that purpose unfolding. Whichever way you lean, one truth remains: the universe works. It works so well that it generated beings capable of noticing how well it works. And in that act of noticing, something extraordinary occurs, not in the stars, not in the equations, but in the awareness itself. That awareness whispers the possibility that this place is not just somewhere to exist, but somewhere to awaken. You are infinite, living in the multiverse of possibilities. Imagine standing in a dark hallway lined with endless mirrors. Each mirror doesn't just reflect your body, but a slightly altered version of you, one with a different haircut, another dressed in clothes you never bought, another holding the hand of someone you've never met. As you keep walking, the reflections shift into more bizarre variations. You see yourself living in a city you've never visited, laughing with a stranger who somehow feels familiar, or wearing a uniform tied to achievements you never experienced. At first it feels like fantasy, but then a strange thought settles in: what if these are not reflections but actual realities? What if every single possibility exists somewhere, playing out as genuinely as the life you're experiencing right now? This is the unsettling yet fascinating suggestion of the multiverse. To many, the idea sounds like science fiction, but physics has been quietly whispering versions of this story for decades. In quantum mechanics, particles are slippery. They don't decide on a single state until they're observed. Until then, they hang in a limbo of possibilities, called superposition. The famous double-slit experiment revealed that particles behave like waves of probability until a conscious observer collapses them into a definite outcome. Some interpretations of quantum theory propose something radical: that the wave never collapses at all. Instead, every outcome unfolds in its own universe. In other words, when you flip a coin, there isn't just one result. In one world, it lands heads. In another, tails. In yet another, it never stops spinning. You, watching the flip, only experiences one version, but the others still exist, continuing without you. When this idea expands beyond coins to the fabric of human life, the implications are dizzying. Every decision you make branches reality. In one universe, you moved abroad. In another, you stayed. In one, you followed love. In another, you chased ambition. There might even be versions where you pursued a passion you abandoned, or where your life looks unrecognizably different. Some alternate selves are nearly identical, only a second or two apart in thought or choice, while others diverge so much they feel alien. The universe becomes not a single timeline, but a vast tree of branching paths where each possibility has weight. You are not a single thread, you are a constellation of potential lives. This idea is both exhilarating and terrifying. If all outcomes exist, do your choices matter? If another version of you made the brave decision, or the mistake you avoided, what difference does it make what you do now? Here is where perspective matters. While countless paths may exist, you are only aware of this one. Your joys and pains, your regrets and triumphs, belong uniquely to you in this thread. To dismiss them as meaningless because of the multiverse is like refusing to read the book in your hands because other books exist on the shelf. The page you live is real precisely because you are present inside it. Think of consciousness as a reader with a flashlight in an infinite library. Each book is a version of your life, some similar, others wildly different, but you can only read one at a time. The act of reading gives the story its reality. The other books remain untouched, yet they still exist, waiting. This metaphor helps us reclaim the sense of importance in our experience. Even if infinite you exist, this one matters because you are living it now. The concept of alternate selves is not just modern physics, it has echoes in myth, religion, and even dreams. Many cultures spoke of spirit doubles, astral twins, or shadow selves. In dreams, people sometimes live entire lifetimes in minutes, or speak languages they've never studied. Are these inventions of the brain, or glimpses of parallel threads bleeding into awareness? The phenomenon of déjà vu, feeling like you've lived a moment before, could be resonance between overlapping realities. These ideas blur the line between science and spirituality, hinting that human beings have always sensed they are more than one story. Psychologically, this perspective can be transformative. Instead of seeing yourself as trapped by past decisions, you begin to view life as fluid. Failure in one branch doesn't erase the fact that somewhere you succeeded. Loneliness in this life doesn't negate the fact that across infinite stars, you are never truly alone. The self stops being a single fragile identity and becomes a pattern like a melody played in infinite variations across realities. Each version validates the others. Yet, this is not an excuse to avoid responsibility. You cannot point to another self and claim their courage counts for you. Watching another person exercise doesn't make you fit, and another you a success doesn't replace your effort here. This branch is yours alone to nurture or neglect. So what do you do with this awareness? You stop seeing life as a narrow hallway where one wrong turn dooms you forever. Instead, you begin to see it as a vast open field. Every step opens new directions, and regret loses its sharp edge. Mistakes don't define you, because possibility is built into the structure of existence. Knowing this, you can choose curiosity over fear, exploration over paralysis. You are not fixed, you are fluid. You are not one story, you are countless narratives intersecting. The multiverse teaches that your life is not a sentence, it's a language. Each version of you speaks a different dialect of possibility, but all share the same underlying truth. You are possible. And maybe, somewhere beyond what you can perceive, another version of you is listening to these same words and drawing strength from them. That thought alone is enough to make this reality feel both cosmic and deeply personal. Because even though the multiverse suggests you are infinite, the power of your life comes not from being all of them, but from fully inhabiting this one. Memory is a story we keep rewriting. Memory is often imagined as a vault, a safe place where experiences are stored untouched, waiting to be replayed like a recording. But neuroscience paints a very different picture. Every time you recall a memory, you are not unlocking a file, you are reconstructing a scene. And with each reconstruction, small shifts occur. The past is not preserved. It is rewritten. Picture memory less like a photograph and more like a painting you keep revisiting. Each brushstroke adds something new, sometimes a detail sharpens, sometimes it blurs, sometimes an entirely new color slips in. Over time, the final painting no longer matches the first draft, even though it feels authentic. This is not deliberate deception by the mind. It's how human cognition functions. Our brains store fragments, bits of sound, imagery, feelings, contextual cues, and whenever we remember, those fragments are stitched together into a coherent story. The stitching process is influenced by the present. Our current emotions, beliefs, and context shape the way the past is reconstructed. This means that memory is dynamic, not static. The more often a memory is recalled, the more vulnerable it becomes to distortion. That's why the moments you swear are your clearest, the ones you've told countless times, are often the most altered. Psychologist Elizabeth Loftus demonstrated this fragility in her groundbreaking studies on false memory. Simply changing a single word in a question transformed people's recollections of a car accident. Smashed, led to reports of higher speeds and even shattered glass that wasn't there, while hit produced more modest accounts. The lesson is profound. Memory is not a snapshot of the past, but a malleable reconstruction that can be nudged by suggestion, expectation, or even casual retelling. This doesn't mean our minds are broken. In fact, it reveals an evolutionary advantage. The human brain values meaning over precision. It shapes memories not to create an exact archive of the past, but to form a narrative that helps us make decisions and preserve identity. This is why memory distortion can sometimes be protective. Painful details may be softened so you can keep moving forward. Someone who hurt you might be remembered more kindly if doing so preserves a relationship that mattered. Trauma can be blurred to allow survival. In this sense, memory is not just a record but a psychological adaptation. Still, there's a paradox. If our memories define who we are, and those memories are partly fictional, what does that say about identity? Think about a childhood story you've told for years, a family trip, a birthday party, a moment of embarrassment or triumph. You may feel certain about the details, but chances are, your brain has smoothed edges, borrowed fragments from others' recollections, or unconsciously edited the sequence to make the story feel whole. Over time, the polished version may have replaced the raw event. You're not lying, you're human. Identity itself emerges from this process. The blending of fact and interpretation into a narrative that feels stable enough to live by. Nostalgia is one of the clearest examples of memory's bias. When you look back on the good old days, your brain doesn't serve up a neutral replay. It highlights warmth, joy, and connection while muting the boredom, fear, or conflict. The glow of nostalgia is an illusion, but one that comforts, offering continuity between past and present. This bias reveals another truth. Memories evolve with who we are now. What you recall at the 30th of May not match how you remembered the same event at 15, because your perspective has changed. The memory bends to fit your current story. This process doesn't just happen individually, it scales up to the level of societies. Collective memory, such as how nations remember wars or revolutions, undergoes the same distortions. Stories are reshaped through repetition, emotion, and omission. Propaganda exploits this, nostalgia fuels it, and myths crystallize from it. Just as siblings can argue passionately over a shared childhood event with both being partly right and partly wrong, entire cultures debate their histories, each side convinced they hold the truth. But these memories, personal or collective, are not meant to be flawless records. They are functional stories. They keep us sane by prioritizing coherence over accuracy. They give us a sense of self, even if the details are skewed. And perhaps that's the most remarkable part. The fragility of memory is also its strength. If memory can be distorted, it can also be reshaped intentionally. You can revisit moments of shame or failure and reinterpret them as lessons. You can recast a painful episode as a chapter of resilience. You can reframe regret into wisdom. The mind is not bound by an unchangeable archive. It's in dialogue with the past, constantly rewriting, and in that rewriting lies the chance for growth. To fully grasp this, think of memory as a palimpsest, a manuscript written, erased, and rewritten across generations. Faint traces of the past remain beneath the new lines, influencing but not dictating the present version. Your brain doesn't deliver the original ink. It offers a layered draft, colored by perspective, mood, and meaning. Sometimes the old text seeps through in dreams or sudden flashbacks. Other times it's overwritten entirely. Either way, memory is not untouched, not pure. This reality may unsettle you. If memories can't be trusted, how do you know who you are? The answer is not to abandon trust in yourself, but to acknowledge that identity is built from narrative, not raw data. You are not a static collection of exact experiences, you are the ongoing author of your story. Each act of remembering is both a recall and a rewrite, a reflection of who you are now as much as who you once were. So next time you recall a defining moment, pause and ask, is this truly how it happened, or how I need it to have happened? The point isn't to doubt yourself endlessly, but to recognize that memory is both fragile and creative. Every recollection is a mosaic, part truth, part interpretation, part imagination. And in that mosaic lies not a flaw, but the very essence of being human. Memory is not a frozen photograph. It is a living canvas, endlessly retouched. A film that edits itself. A book with shifting chapters. And in embracing this truth, you don't lose yourself, you see yourself more clearly. Because memory is not about perfect accuracy. It's about creating meaning, continuity, and the story that lets you live today. The hard problem of consciousness. Why the flame still flickers. Consciousness is both the most familiar thing we know and the greatest mystery we face. Every thought you've had today, every sensation of warmth, color, or memory, has been filtered through it. And yet, despite centuries of philosophy and decades of neuroscience, we still cannot define what consciousness actually is. Imagine staring at a candle flame in a dark room. You see the glow, feel the heat, watch molecules dancing in combustion, but no single description captures the essence of the flame itself. Consciousness works the same way. It is undeniable, ever-present, yet impossible to pin down with a neat scientific formula. Science has catalogued the brain's astonishing complexity. We can observe regions firing during speech, memory, or emotion. We can quiet awareness with anesthesia and watch it return, but none of this explains why experience feels like something from the inside. That puzzle is known as the hard problem of consciousness, a term coined by philosopher David Chalmers. The problem isn't hard, in the sense of requiring better instruments or more data. It's hard because it may lie beyond the explanatory tools science currently uses. We know neurons fire, chemicals flow, and circuits process signals, but why does any of this generate the redness of a sunset, the sting of heartbreak, or the intimacy of memory? These private, subjective building blocks of awareness are called qualia, and they resist direct measurement. You can describe the taste of coffee, but no experiment can let someone sip it exactly as you experience it. Neuroscience can correlate states of mind with neural patterns, but correlation isn't the same as explanation. This is the wall science keeps hitting. It studies consciousness from the outside, while consciousness itself is always lived from the inside. Several theories attempt to bridge this divide. Integrated information theory argues that consciousness depends on how much information a system integrates, suggesting that complex networks might glow with awareness like a light bulb brightens as more circuits connect. Another influential idea, global workspace theory, likens consciousness to a theater where one mental process steps into the spotlight while countless others wait backstage. These metaphors are elegant, but they still describe how consciousness behaves, not what it is. It's like defining fire by cataloging smoke, useful but incomplete. Artificial intelligence complicates things further. Machines can now write stories, compose music, simulate conversation, even mimic empathy or reflection. They can pass simplified versions of the Turing test, fooling us into perceiving awareness. But are they truly conscious, or only executing clever scripts with no light behind the curtain? If they're not conscious, what spark is missing that the human brain has? And if consciousness is instead a spectrum, could AI occupy some faint rung of it without us realizing? These questions expose the gap between function and experience. A system can act intelligent without ever feeling. And yet, maybe consciousness itself isn't binary but layered, textured in ways we don't yet recognize. Philosophy hasn't provided closure either. Western thought often frames consciousness as something emerging from matter, as in Descartes' famous line, "I think, therefore I am." But that statement proves only existence, not its essence. Eastern traditions, such as Buddhism or Advaita, flip the picture. Consciousness is not a product of the brain, but the very ground of reality, like the canvas on which every thought and perception is painted. According to these views, you are not inside consciousness, rather, consciousness is the medium in which you arise. The brain might function more like a mirror reflecting awareness than a lantern generating it. If the mirror shatters, does the light vanish or does it continue elsewhere? The possibility raises the question of whether consciousness might survive the body or whether it dissolves when neural machinery stops firing. Beyond metaphysics, these questions shape how we think of life itself. Are we temporary riders on a biological machine, or is the machine just one way consciousness explores itself? Extending this mystery outward, what about animals? Dogs display joy, grief, even jealousy. Octopuses solve puzzles with uncanny problem-solving skills. Birds dream during sleep. Do they feel like something from the inside? If they do, how different is their inner world from ours? The question isn't only vertical humans compared to animals but horizontal as well. Even between two people, experience may be radically unalike. What if the color I call red looks to you like what I see as green? But we'll never know because we use the same word. Consciousness is solitary in that way, a flame burning privately in each skull, never directly comparable. It bends our experience of space and time too. A stressful minute can stretch into eternity, while an hour in joy can vanish unnoticed. Fear makes spaces shrink and shadows loom. Calm expands them. Consciousness doesn't merely observe reality, it actively reshapes it. But still, we have no definition of what this reshaper actually is. Some scientists propose that consciousness may not emerge from matter at all, but be a basic feature of the universe itself, like mass or charge. This idea, called panpsychism, suggests that even electrons or rocks contain some faint glimmer of awareness, not thought as we know it, but a seed of experience. If true, consciousness wouldn't be rare but universal, with human brains serving only as elaborate mirrors where awareness becomes self-reflective. Yet this, too, is speculative. And that's where we circle back. We don't know. Science excels at mapping brain activity, measuring waves, even halting awareness with chemicals. But the leap from brain states to lived experience remains unexplained. It's as though we are sailors charting an ocean from inside a glass submarine, recording every ripple without ever touching the water's source. Consciousness remains both question and questioner, both tool and target. To study it is like pointing one mirror into another, chasing reflections that retreat into infinity. And yet, perhaps this endlessness is precisely what makes consciousness profound. It reminds us that being human isn't only about neurons and circuits, it's about wonder, intimacy, and mystery. Right now, you are aware of these words on the screen. That awareness, unshareable, unquantifiable, is the very thing science cannot yet define. It is the candle in the dark room, flickering, refusing to be captured, and reminding us that the deepest part of life may always remain just beyond the reach of explanation. The hidden storms of empty space. Why the vacuum is alive. When we picture space, most of us imagine a silent abyss, a cold, endless nothing stretching in every direction, dotted here and there with stars or galaxies. It feels natural to think of space as a void, a backdrop, a dark canvas on which the universe paints itself. But this image is misleading. Space is not a passive emptiness. It is an active, dynamic, restless medium, constantly alive with invisible fluctuations and hidden energy. What we casually call empty space is, in truth, one of the most vibrant and mysterious aspects of reality. One way to think about it is like staring at the surface of a frozen lake. To the eye, it looks still, solid, perhaps even lifeless. But beneath that icy crust, water churns, currents flow, and life teems in ways we cannot see from above. Space is much the same. Beneath the appearance of stillness, it hums with activity. Quantum field theory, one of the most successful frameworks in physics, tells us that everything we know, electrons, photons, quarks, even entire atoms, is simply a ripple or vibration of an invisible field that spans all of reality. These fields are not temporary. They do not suddenly turn on when a particle shows up. They are always there, always fluctuating, even when no detectable particle exists. This means that even the most perfect vacuum we can engineer in a lab is not truly empty. Instead, it's alive with what physicists call vacuum fluctuations, brief bursts of energy that spontaneously appear and vanish in the blink of an eye. It's as if the universe is forever playing a microscopic game of pop-up, where particles blink into being and then disappear before we can catch them. This is not speculation, it's measurable. The Casimir effect is a famous example. Place two uncharged metal plates extremely close together in a vacuum, and they are mysteriously pushed toward each other. No magnetism, no static electricity, no gravity. The cause? The difference in quantum fields between the inside and outside of the plates. The so-called emptiness of space is literally doing the pushing. This realization forces us to rethink what space really is. Instead of a stage where the universe plays out, space itself is part of the drama. It bends, it flexes, it ripples. Einstein's general relativity revolutionized our view by showing us that gravity is not an invisible force pulling objects together, but rather the warping of space itself. The Earth doesn't tug you down. Instead, it curves the space beneath your feet so that you move along its bends. Space is not static silk stretched across the cosmos, it's a trampoline, deforming under weight, snapping back when disturbed. And yet, relativity gives us only part of the picture. On the smallest scales, quantum theory suggests space is not smooth at all, but granular and jittery. At distances smaller than any microscope could ever see, the Planck-length space may resemble a frothing foam, full of violent fluctuations, like boiling water viewed up close. This so-called quantum foam is not just an exotic idea. It may help explain mysteries like dark energy, the force that drives the accelerating expansion of the universe. It may also underpin virtual particles, the fleeting influences that shape how real particles behave, even when no actual particle is present. Imagine zooming in closer and closer to space until the apparent calmness unravels into chaos, like magnifying a quiet pond until every molecule of water reveals a storm of jittering motion. This turbulence could be the hidden foundation of everything, the silent scaffolding that props up reality. It might even connect to the Higgs field, which gives particles their mass. In this way, the vacuum is not a void but a hidden engine, constantly influencing the universe. The metaphors help us glimpse the enormity of this idea. You might imagine space as a vast invisible loom, woven with countless threads of energy and possibility. Most of the time, these threads cancel out, leaving us with the illusion of calm. But every so often, the weave knots, stretches, or vibrates, producing matter, energy, and form. Everything we call something, stars, planets, your body, your thoughts, is a temporary twist in that invisible fabric. And there's more. Quantum entanglement suggests that particles can be mysteriously linked across vast distances, such that the state of one instantly determines the other, no matter how far apart they are. This phenomenon suggests that space is not simply what separates things, but what connects them. Space may not be a neutral emptiness but a network of hidden ties. If so, then even time itself might not exist independently. Some physicists believe that time could emerge from these correlations, from the way quantum fluctuations entangle with each other. In that view, the arrow of time, the difference between past and future, is not fundamental at all, but a side effect of the restless ocean of space. What makes this perspective so unsettling is how it changes our everyday perception. We walk, breathe, and live as though space were a void. We gaze into the night sky and imagine stillness, distance, and silence. But in reality, every moment of our existence is shaped by a sea of storms we cannot perceive. The atoms in your body are subtly influenced by invisible fields rippling beneath you. Every photon of light you see has passed through the jitter of quantum fluctuations. You are immersed not in emptiness, but in a hidden ocean of ceaseless activity. Perhaps the best way to grasp this is through analogy. Think of a field of grass, lush and green. To the casual eye, it's just a flat patch of vegetation. But beneath the soil lies an entire ecosystem. Roots twisting and intertwining, insects burrowing, microbes working in constant motion. The field looks serene, but its life depends on the frantic activity hidden just below. Space is the same. It looks calm. It looks empty. But beneath that apparent silence, everything is moving, vibrating, and connecting in ways that sustain the reality we experience. If there's a final lesson, it's this: emptiness is never truly empty. What we thought was nothing is, in fact, the most fundamental something. The vacuum is not a void, it is the foundation of reality itself. Space is alive, and we are floating within its restless heart. The consciousness loop, when the observer becomes the observed. Consciousness is a strange and slippery thing. We tend to think of it as a simple lens, something that just takes in reality and processes it. But the more you reflect on the act of reflecting, the more the edges begin to blur. Imagine standing in front of a mirror. At first, you're just checking your face, making sure nothing is out of place. But if you stare long enough, something unsettling begins to happen. That reflection doesn't just look like you, it begins to feel like it's looking back. The longer the gaze continues, the less it feels like you're in control of the staring. What if the thing in the mirror isn't only your face, but also your awareness of being aware? This is where observation folds back on itself, looping endlessly. We usually think of perception as passive. You see a tree, you hear a sound, you notice a thought. But once you begin to notice the act of noticing, something changes. It's as if you've pointed a camera at its own live feed. The image doesn't just repeat, it creates distortions, feedback, echoes. Consciousness works in a similar way. It isn't just a beam of light shining outward into the world. It's more like a hall of mirrors, each reflection bending back into another, until you can't tell where the original begins or where it ends. This recursive quality isn't just an abstract musing, it's one of the central puzzles of psychology, neuroscience, and even artificial intelligence. A machine can record data, a camera can capture motion. But the human mind doesn't just take in reality. It models it, revises it, rehearses it, and then questions its own models. You think a thought, and then you think about the fact that you thought it. That second-order awareness is where things get complicated. Life becomes not just lived but narrated. You don't just experience, you comment on your own experience, you judge it, sometimes you even rewrite it in your head. This commentary is what makes us self-aware, but it also creates confusion. The more you analyze the story of your life, the harder it becomes to know whether you're living authentically or just watching yourself perform. In neuroscience, this loop shows up in concepts like metacognition, thinking about thinking, and in the default mode network, the brain system that activates when you're not doing anything in particular. Left idle, your brain starts running its own internal theater, replays of conversations, rehearsals of future scenarios, self-criticism, and self-praise. This network is basically the backstage of your identity. Yet every time you observe your own mind at work, you subtly change it. Much like a quantum particle whose state shifts once measured, your thoughts morph under the spotlight of attention. Try to examine your desires, and they slip out of focus. Inspect your fears, and they grow new forms. The act of self-reflection reshapes what it observes, making the true self a moving target that never stays still long enough to grasp. This looping effect isn't limited to private thought. It spills into social life. Walk into a crowded room, and instantly you become aware of being perceived. But you don't just react to others, you begin performing for the image of yourself you think they see. You adjust your gestures, your tone of voice, even the rhythm of your laughter. Over time, you internalize this imagined audience, carrying it with you everywhere. It becomes a silent critic that watches every move, a mental mirror that never goes dark. And here's the paradox. You're no longer simply living, but also living for the self that is watching you. The observer has nested inside your head, shaping identity from the inside out. Artists and creators know this loop intimately. A painter second-guesses brushstrokes before the paint dries. A writer edits sentences before they're even written. A speaker hears their own voice mid-sentence and cringes. This meta-awareness can breed hesitation, anxiety, or perfectionism, but it can also sharpen expression. Genius often emerges from walking that tightrope between pure spontaneity and relentless self-scrutiny. Too much self-awareness can paralyze, but just enough can refine raw instinct into brilliance. Spiritual traditions have wrestled with this problem for millennia. Some traditions call it ego, others call it illusion. Practices like meditation are designed not to silence the mind, but to watch thoughts drift by without clinging to them. The point isn't to erase thinking, it's to stop identifying so deeply with each thought, to realize that you are not the storm of mental chatter, but the open sky it passes through. Yet even here, the loop asserts itself. The very act of watching the mind creates another layer of observation. You become aware of being aware, and the loop deepens. For many philosophies, enlightenment is not about winning the loop, but escaping the need to observe altogether. But how do you stop watching yourself without first deciding to? And the moment you decide, you're already watching again. This loop doesn't just matter for human beings. In artificial intelligence, researchers face a hauntingly similar question. If a machine can not only process input, but also reflect on its own internal states, does that count as consciousness? Or is it just mimicry, a trick of complexity? After all, if reflection itself is enough to spark self-awareness, what does that mean for us? Are we fundamentally different from recursive machines that constantly model themselves and their world? Or is there some spark, some essence, that remains uniquely human? So we return to the mirror, back to that first image of yourself staring into your own eyes. What unsettles you is not just the face staring back, it's the realization that within every act of reflection, a loop is silently spinning. It never stops. Every attempt to step outside it only creates another mirror. You think you're pulling back, but really, you're diving deeper. The observer can never truly escape the observed, because in the realm of consciousness, they are the same. That is both the trap and the mystery of awareness. You are not just living, you're also forever watching yourself live. The illusion of solidity. Why reality is built on nothingness. The world feels firm beneath your fingertips. Tap on a table, lean against a wall, or curl your hands into your chest, and you're certain you're pressing against something solid, something dense, something real. But physics whispers a stranger truth. Solidity is a story your mind tells you. At the atomic scale, everything you see, everything you trust, everything you believe is made of emptiness. The strange irony is that what we call matter is a performance, a cooperative illusion stitched together by forces that never truly let objects touch. It feels unyielding, but beneath that reassuring surface, the foundations dissolve. At first this seems impossible. A wooden desk appears to your senses as an unbreakable slab. You could slam your hand against it and feel its resistance, maybe even bruise your skin. But the sensation of impact is not atoms colliding like billiard balls. It's the pushback of electric fields, electrons repelling electrons. You are not touching the table in the way your instincts tell you are hovering, kept aloft by invisible interactions. Physics insists the desk, like your body, is 99.999% empty space. If an atom were inflated to the size of a cathedral, its nucleus would be no more than a marble at the center, while electrons whirl far away at the edges. Between them lies a vast desert of nothingness. And yet, you never fall through. That paradox is part of the brilliance of perception. Our nervous system evolved to interpret resistance as solidity. Without that trick of consciousness, you would never survive. A rock hurled toward your face doesn't announce its emptiness, it arrives with weight and pain. Reality at human scale demands certainty. To walk, to climb, to hold tools, to trust that the ground won't dissolve beneath you. But zoom in far enough, and the rules collapse. Molecules fracture into atoms, atoms unravel into protons and neutrons, and even those so-called particles resolve into quarks held by gluons, ghost-like entities flashing in and out of existence. Solidity was never there. To picture this, think of a city skyline at night. From far away, the towers look continuous, sealed, and whole. Step closer and windows appear. Step inside and you find rooms, stairwells, elevators, most of it open air. At atomic scale, the exaggeration is even more profound. The scaffolding of energy is surrounded by vast oceans of void. When you sit on a chair, you're actually suspended by electron clouds refusing to overlap. When you clasp your hands, the atoms never merge. You float above yourself by fractions of a nanometer. Everything you perceive as contact is force, not touch. But why stop at physics? The illusion of solidity is not only about atoms, it is also about the structures we place our faith in. Social institutions, laws, identities, even the idea of selfhood, they appear concrete, but under close inspection they dissolve into agreements, stories, and patterns of behavior. What you lean on as truth is often scaffolding, a framework repeated until it feels permanent. Money is paper because we agree it has value. Nations are lines on maps that people defend with their lives. Even your own personality is not a fixed block, but a shifting mosaic of habits, memories, and neural firings. Like atoms, these systems hold their form until they don't, and then the illusion cracks. And yet emptiness is not tragedy. In fact, emptiness is what makes existence possible. Imagine if the universe were packed wall to wall with substance, no void between. A violin string would never vibrate. Air would never flow into lungs. Light itself would have nowhere to travel. The spaces between things give shape to everything we experience. The void is not absence, it is the stage on which every performance occurs. It allows freedom, vibration, breath, motion, sound. Without emptiness, there is no life. This recognition reframes how you think about yourself. You are not a heap of matter glued together. You are a pattern woven out of energy, a rhythm sustained by the architecture of absence. Your bones, your skin, even your memories are temporary arrangements of particles suspended in a void. Consciousness itself, the feeling of you, is a fragile coordination of neurons firing across synaptic gaps. Thought is not a stone, it is a ripple. Identity is not a wall, it is a wave, always shifting, always flowing. And if solidity is an illusion, then certainty must be one too. The rules you believe in, whether physical, social, or personal are convenient fictions, scaffolds to keep you balanced in a storm of flux. This doesn't mean they are meaningless. Quite the opposite. Their meaning arises precisely because they are impermanent. A chair exists as long as its structure holds, just as trust exists as long as agreements are honored. Solidity is borrowed, not guaranteed. This view can be unsettling. We long for something permanent to anchor ourselves to, a ground that will not give way. But perhaps the deeper wisdom is to see the grace in impermanence. Out of emptiness comes music, motion, creativity, love. Out of space comes the possibility of connection. If everything were rigid, the universe would be silent, frozen, dead. It is because we are mostly nothing that we can move, breathe, and feel. So when you return to that table and press your fingers against it, realize what is happening. You are not touching wood. You are interacting with forces. You are floating on fields. You are a structure of near-nothingness interacting with another structure of near-nothingness, and yet from that strange dance emerges the weight of your world. That is the miracle, not that things fall apart, but that anything holds together at all. The invisible code, how your mind gets programmed without you knowing. Most people believe their mind is their own, that every preference, opinion, and choice is born from their individuality. But what if the mind works less like a sovereign kingdom and more like a room that has been slowly decorated by forces you never noticed? Imagine walking into a space filled with objects that feel personal: photographs, favorite books, familiar clothes, yet you cannot recall ever placing them there. That is the unsettling reality of mental programming. It doesn't arrive like a sci-fi device with wires and blinking lights. Instead, it seeps in subtly, like wallpaper that has been hanging on your walls so long you forget it wasn't always there. The truth is, the human mind is not programmed by machines but by culture, repetition, language, and experiences that sneak in without conscious permission. Every day you consume media, repeat routines, hear songs, laugh at jokes, and scroll through feeds. These are not neutral events. Each one is a seed that takes root in the soil of your subconscious. And over time, the river of repeated exposure carves mental canyons that guide the flow of thought. Suddenly, what feels like my personality may actually be a map drawn by influences you didn't consciously select. Language itself demonstrates how programming works. In English, we say, "I am sad," which fuses identity with emotion. In some other languages, the equivalent translates to, "I have sadness," which treats the emotion as a temporary condition. That tiny linguistic difference influences how entire populations relate to feelings. One creates identification, the other creates separation. When multiplied across culture, education, and media, these subtle variations shape identity itself. Culture reinforces the architecture. If you grew up in a society that glorifies individual freedom, you'll likely see personal independence as the highest good. If you grew up in one that values community harmony, you may instinctively prioritize relationships over autonomy. Neither value system is inherently superior, but whichever one you inherit becomes the lens through which you evaluate everything else. It feels objective, but it is simply the water you've been swimming in since birth. Repetition strengthens the programming. A phrase repeated long enough becomes accepted as truth, not because it has factual merit but because the brain mistakes familiarity for reality. This is why advertising slogans, jingles, and political catchphrases stick even when you consciously dislike them. Social media platforms and political campaigns exploit this mechanism relentlessly. Your brain, wired to recognize patterns, begins to treat the common as correct, the visible as valid. Soon, intuition isn't independent judgment, it's simply the echo of reinforced exposure. But here's where it gets more complicated. You're not only influenced by outside forces. Much of your programming originates within you from childhood defenses, teenage aspirations, or habits that once served a purpose but now confine you. You convince yourself, "That's just who I am," when in reality, it might simply be a groove carved years ago by repetition or survival. A child who learned to avoid conflict by staying quiet may grow into an adult who equates silence with safety, mistaking it for personality rather than outdated programming. Even memory itself is malleable. Neuroscience shows that each time you recall a memory, you rewrite it slightly, aligning it with your current emotional state or worldview. Over years, your past is not a fixed archive but an evolving storybook edited by your present biases. What you believe about who you've been is itself influenced by who you think you are now. In other words, memory is not immune to programming, it is one of its tools. The influence extends beyond personal memory into collective perception. Headlines, feeds, and trending stories aren't random. They are curated, ranked, and filtered by algorithms and by human psychology. Fear spreads faster than nuance. Outrage captures attention better than complexity. So what surfaces in your awareness is not necessarily what's most accurate, it's what's most contagious. And because the human brain is efficient, it begins to treat the repeated and the visible as natural and trustworthy. What is common begins to feel correct. What is familiar begins to feel true. Social groups amplify this effect. Beliefs are contagious in tribes. You laugh more when others laugh, hesitate more when others disapprove. Over time, you align your behavior with the group not because you are forced to, but because the subtle cost of standing apart becomes unbearable. Eventually, you internalize the group's code, defend it, and mistake it for your authentic voice. At this point, the external program has become an internal script. Questioning it doesn't just feel rebellious, it feels like betraying yourself. So what does all this mean for your sense of self? Are you merely a puppet of hidden forces, a collage of borrowed beliefs? The unsettling answer is that, to a degree, yes, you are programmable. But that realization isn't a condemnation. It's an invitation. Because once you see the wires, you can begin to rewire. Awareness opens the door to authorship. When you pause to ask, is this belief mine, or did I inherit it? Is this desire authentically me, or was it planted by repetition and advertising? You interrupt the loop. You begin to make room for deliberate choice. Reprogramming doesn't mean wiping the slate clean or rejecting every influence. It means reclaiming agency over what you allow to enter and take root. Like tending a garden, you can choose which seeds to water and which to let wither. You can seek out diverse inputs, expose yourself to competing worldviews, and question the narratives you've always accepted as normal. It requires effort, yes, but so does every form of freedom. Programming thrives on unconsciousness. Liberation begins with attention. Ultimately, the mind is not a static vault where knowledge and values are stored. It's a living stage where ideas, beliefs, and habits play out roles handed down by culture, family, advertising, and experience. For most people, the director's chair sits empty. Scripts are followed without question, actors perform their lines without rehearsal, and the play continues as if it couldn't be otherwise. But the chair isn't locked. It's waiting for you to sit down. And when you do, you realize you don't have to demolish the theater. You only have to start directing the story, consciously changing the lighting, cutting certain scenes, rewriting certain lines. Slowly, deliberately, you reclaim authorship. Your mind will always be shaped by the world around it, that's the nature of being human. But shaping is not the same as submission. You cannot stop influence, but you can choose which influences get the spotlight. You cannot erase programming, but you can write over it. And the moment you recognize that possibility is the moment you stop being just an actor in someone else's story. It's the moment you become the author of your own. Quantum immortality, the strange possibility of never dying. Imagine walking into a library that never ends, each shelf packed with books, every book describing a different version of your life. Some volumes are painfully short, mere chapters before ending in an accident, an illness, or a mistake. Others are thick and sprawling, telling stories of adventures you never had, jobs you never worked, people you never loved but might have. And buried somewhere in this infinite archive is a peculiar book that has no final page, a story that refuses to close. That book is the unsettling idea of quantum immortality, the notion that in at least one branch of reality, you never die. Not because you are supernatural or indestructible, but because the odds, however improbable, always manage to bend in your favor. This concept emerges from the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, a radical take on physics that suggests every possible outcome of every event actually happens, each in its own reality. At every moment the universe fractures. You flip heads and tails, you live and die, you succeed and fail, and all of these versions of you unfold simultaneously. Your personal experience, though, is always tied to just one line of survival. This is where the disturbing twist comes in. If consciousness can only exist in realities where it persists, then from your perspective you never experience death. Each time chance decides, your awareness simply continues in whichever branch you survive, leaving the dead versions inaccessible, discarded like books you'll never get to read. From the inside, it feels like extraordinary luck, like you're the person who keeps surviving car crashes, illnesses, or sheer coincidence. But really, you're just traveling down the rarest corridors of probability, where survival keeps being selected. Now, it's worth slowing down here, because this isn't a mystical guarantee of eternal life. Physicists don't agree this is real. It remains a philosophical and mathematical thought experiment. The idea emerges because quantum mechanics, the rules that govern particles at the smallest scales, don't behave like the neat, predictable world we see. Instead, particles exist in multiple potential states until observed. One interpretation, the many worlds view, says the wave of possibilities never collapses. Instead, the universe splits endlessly, generating every possible outcome in parallel realities. When you see it this way, quantum immortality is just a peculiar consequence. If all outcomes exist, there must be at least one where you simply never stop waking up. But here's where commentary becomes important. Immortality in this form isn't the comforting dream humans usually crave. It's not eternal youth, not heaven, not a gift. It's survival by exclusion. In almost every branch, you die like everyone else. But your subjective perspective never reaches those universes. You only keep experiencing the statistically unlikely versions where you somehow pull through. And that means, eventually, you may find yourself in a version of reality where you are still alive, but everything else is gone: friends, family, familiar places. Time keeps moving, but you are the stubborn thread that refuses to snap. The price of immortality, then, could be loneliness. A long corridor of improbable survivals, where every moment feels stranger because of how unlikely it is. Now think about how this idea reframes luck. Most of us think of survival as skill, resilience, or coincidence. But under this framework, you never experience being unlucky in the ultimate sense, because you're not conscious in the branches where misfortune kills you. You only ever perceive the lucky branches, even when survival feels ridiculous. You always wake up as the version that lived, no matter how improbable. To you, it's just another day. To the universe, it's one branch among countless others. The thought experiment also forces us to wrestle with identity. If every possible version of you exists, who are you, really? Are you the sum of all your variations, or just the one who happens to be reading this sentence right now? When choices split, you don't feel the branching. You don't sense the other versions who didn't open this video or who made a different decision earlier today. Consciousness is like a spotlight moving forward, always illuminating one path, while countless other paths unfold in shadow. That subjective continuity, always being the one who keeps going, might be the closest thing we have to immortality. Not endless life, but endless awareness of survival. To put it another way, picture a hallway lined with mirrors. Each mirror reflects a different version of you, one who turned left instead of right, one who lived, one who didn't. With every step forward, mirrors multiply, some shattering, others persisting. You can't see most of them again, but your awareness always walks forward, always carried by the version of you that continues. That's the strange, eerie promise of quantum immortality. Not the power to live forever, but the inability to ever truly experience your own end. Of course, we must emphasize again, this isn't proven physics. It's speculation. No experiment can confirm that your awareness slips into another branch after death. There's no way to peek across universes and wave to the other versions of yourself. In fact, many physicists caution against treating this as anything more than an imaginative extension of math. But maybe its real value isn't in promising eternal life, but in reminding us how extraordinary our current life already is. In a universe of infinite possibilities, the fact that you exist here, now, reading these words, is itself improbable and astonishing. That's the philosophical gold hidden inside the theory. You don't need to hope for immortality in some alternate branch of the multiverse. You already carry the weight of infinite chance in this moment. Every decision, every survival, every breath you take represents a path carved out from countless others that could have been. To realize that is to understand that life is already precious, already rare. The idea of quantum immortality becomes less about living forever and more about recognizing the miracle of being alive at all. So maybe the point isn't whether you'll never die in some hidden corridor of reality. Maybe the point is that right now, in this branch, against impossible odds, you are alive. And that, in its own way, might be the closest thing to infinity you'll ever need. When the future rewrites the past, the mind-bending lessons of quantum delayed choice. Imagine walking into a room where a play is taking place. You think the actors began the moment you opened the door, but what if they had somehow been waiting, silently adjusting their costumes and lines in anticipation of your arrival? Stranger still, what if they had prepared for you not when they saw you, but because they already knew you were going to come? This sounds like a poetic metaphor, but in the world of quantum physics something unsettlingly close to this idea occurs. Particles, the most fundamental pieces of matter, do not always behave like passive objects waiting for measurement. In some experiments, they appear to act as though they anticipate being observed, adapting their behavior in ways that defy the very order of time itself. The story begins with one of the most famous experiments in physics, the double slit test. Fire tiny particles, like electrons, through two slits aimed at a screen, and instead of forming two neat piles like bullets would, they create interference patterns, ripples like waves colliding in water. The shocking part is that each individual electron seems to pass through both slits at once, interfering with itself. But once a scientist places a detector to check which slit the electron actually passes through, the pattern disappears. Suddenly, the electron behaves like a solid particle, choosing a path. Observation alone collapses possibility into certainty. This would already be puzzling enough, but physicist John Wheeler dared to push the paradox further with what became known as the delayed choice experiment. He asked, what if the decision to observe the electron's path was made after it had already traveled through the slits? Logic tells us the particle should have decided earlier, before we checked. Yet experiments show otherwise. It is as if the particle's earlier behavior adjusted to fit the later measurement. If you chose to observe, it acted like a particle. If you didn't, it left a wave-like interference pattern. Retroactively, the past seemed rewritten. The story grows even stranger with the quantum eraser variation. Imagine recording which slit a photon traveled through, but later erasing that information before looking at the final result. Astonishingly, the interference pattern reappears as though the act of erasure undid the measurement after the fact. It's almost as if a message was whispered into the past and obeyed instantly, as though time itself is less a one-way arrow and more a malleable loop. Now, what are we to make of this? Are particles psychic, somehow predicting our intentions? Probably not in the mystical sense. Instead, what these results seem to suggest is that our old model of reality, a solid universe unfolding like a pre-written script, simply does not match the evidence. Reality at the quantum level appears relational, meaning it only comes into definition through interactions, measurements, and exchanges of information. In other words, the universe doesn't present us with fixed objects until we engage with them. Think about it like a choose-your-own-adventure book. When you decide to flip ahead to chapter 10, the earlier pages are subtly rewritten to make sense of your choice. It isn't that the story was fully determined in advance. It morphs to match your engagement. At the quantum level, reality behaves similarly. It is not a passive story being told, but a living narrative co-written by the observer and the observed. What does this mean for time? We normally picture it as a river flowing steadily in one direction, each cause leading to its effect. But delayed choice experiments suggest something closer to a web. Touch one thread and ripples travel not only outward into the future, but also backward into the past. The line between before and after blurs, replaced by a strange feedback loop. Some physicists describe this as a Mobius strip of time, where what seems to be separate sides, past and future, are actually connected surfaces of a single twist. This idea unsettles because it challenges our daily assumptions. We live by sequences. First you decide, then you act, then you get results. But the quantum world seems to allow future conditions to influence past outcomes. This does not mean you can will lottery numbers into existence or bend spoons with your thoughts. But it does suggest that consciousness, our act of observation, has a participatory role in shaping the physical reality we witness, even across time. Consider the implications. If the universe is, at its deepest level, made of information rather than solid matter, then measurement is like running a piece of code. Your observation doesn't just reveal what's there, it completes the execution of the program. In this sense, the future and present are not separate. The logic of the whole timeline is settled only when you interact with it. Consciousness doesn't create reality wholesale, but it helps finalize it, ensuring consistency across the web of possibilities. This brings us back to the unsettling but liberating conclusion: the self may not be confined to a single moment. Instead, consciousness could be distributed across time, threading through probabilities like a traveler adjusting a maze as they walk it. Your decisions may not only ripple forward, but also echo backward, subtly influencing how reality crystallizes. It's as if you are not drifting helplessly downstream, but also weaving the current as you move. Does this mean reality is an illusion? Not exactly. It means reality might not be built out of hard objects, but out of relationships and choices, collapsing possibilities into facts only when necessary. The delayed choice experiments don't prove that the universe is aware in a human sense, but they do hint that awareness itself is deeply entangled with what we call physical reality. When you step back and reflect, the experiments remind us of how porous the boundaries truly are, between observer and observed, between matter and mind, between past and future. What science has revealed is not a tidy stage where everything unfolds in linear order, but a strange theater in which the script is still being written as you watch, and sometimes rewritten based on choices you haven't even made yet. Perhaps the lesson is this: time is less a line than a tapestry, and your awareness is one of the threads weaving its pattern. Reality is not something you merely witness, but something you quietly help bring into being. The self as a story. Why your identity is never fixed. What if I told you that the version of you carry around isn't some eternal truth, but more like a story your brain keeps retelling, editing, and rewriting? We grow up being told to find ourselves, as if hidden somewhere there's a single unchanging essence waiting to be discovered. But neuroscience and psychology suggest something stranger, and maybe more liberating. Your identity is not a fixed object but a narrative, stitched together moment by moment. This doesn't mean you're fake. It means you're more fluid than you realize. Think about how often you describe yourself with certainty. That's just who I am. Or, I've always been this way. But if you rewind your life, you'll notice shifts, versions of yourself that don't perfectly align. The child who was shy, the teenager desperate to belong, the adult trying to look competent at work, and the private self that sometimes feels lost or vulnerable. These aren't masks hiding a true you, they are the story itself unfolding. The brain doesn't preserve one central self. Instead, it acts like a novelist under constant deadline, piecing together fragments, memories, habits, labels, cultural roles into a working draft of you. What makes this fascinating is that memory itself is unreliable. We like to think of memories as video recordings stored on a hard drive. But research shows they're more like puzzle pieces scattered across the brain. Each time you recall one, you reconstruct it slightly, influenced by your current mood, emotions, and beliefs. The you remember, the confident student, the awkward kid, the brave traveler, isn't an exact replay. It's part fact, part reinterpretation. You're editing history every time you remember it. This is why two people can recall the same event so differently, and why even your own memories shift over time. This constant rewriting is both the strength and the limitation of identity. The continuity you feel, this sense of being the same person all your life, is more psychological glue than biological fact. Without that glue, life would feel chaotic. But the downside is that we cling to the story too tightly. We filter experiences to fit our narrative. If something doesn't fit, like betrayal, trauma, or radical self-discovery, our brain either twists it to match or risks the story breaking apart. That rupture is what we often call an identity crisis. It feels terrifying, but it's not the end. It's simply the story collapsing, giving space for a new version to emerge. The fluid nature of identity is clearer when you look at context. Around family, you might unconsciously fall into the role of obedient child. Around friends, you become the funny storyteller. In professional settings, you perform competence and control. And when you're alone, you may feel softer, uncertain, or even contradictory to those other versions. These shifts don't mean you're insincere, they highlight your adaptability. Identity isn't a sculpture carved once. It's a river, reshaped by every bend in the landscape. So why does the brain keep insisting otherwise? Because stories demand continuity. Imagine reading a novel where the main character changes personality every few pages without explanation. It would feel chaotic, impossible to follow. To avoid that chaos, your brain smooths over contradictions, rationalizes your behavior, edits out inconvenient truths, and stitches everything together into a single protagonist you. The irony is that this protagonist feels like a permanent truth, when in reality, it's a draft being revised every day. This isn't just philosophical speculation. Neuroscience backs it up. There is no single self-center in the brain. Instead, identity is distributed across networks that regulate memory, sensory input, emotional processing, and social behavior. At any given moment, different circuits light up depending on context. The you that shows up when you're angry isn't the same as the you when you're relaxed. The self is a moving target, constructed in real time. Now, if identity is a story, the important question is, who's writing it? The uncomfortable truth is that much of the draft was written for you. Family, culture, teachers, friends, all of them contributed lines to the script you now recite. You're the responsible one. You're not athletic. You'll never be creative. Sometimes we embrace these roles. Other times, we rebel against them. But even rebellion is part of the script. The question worth asking is, do these sentences still serve you? Or are you living inside a story written by someone else's expectations? If this sounds destabilizing, here's the empowering part. Being a story means you're not locked in. You're not doomed to the first draft. You can reinterpret, rewrite, and even reframe your past. That failure, maybe it wasn't the end, but the turning point. That breakup, not proof you're unlovable, but a chapter of growth. Even your wounds can take on new meaning when you choose to edit them into the story differently. This isn't lying to yourself, it's acknowledging that meaning is always constructed, and you have the power to reshape it. That's why therapy, journaling, or even travel can change you so deeply. They shine new light on the invisible ink of your story. They don't create a brand new self out of thin air. They reveal new ways of reading the pages you've already written. Each time you do this, the character evolves. You become more than a collection of recycled lines, you become an active author. Of course, stories resist chaos. When something truly unexpected happens, the narrative either stretches to contain it or shatters. Trauma often forces us into this shattering where the protagonist suddenly doesn't make sense anymore. But even here, possibility hides inside the rupture. When the old script is gone, you have the chance to write differently. You can step out of character, wipe away the stage makeup, and sit for a moment in the silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but of potential, the pause before a new line is spoken. The danger isn't that you'll change. Change is inevitable. The danger is clinging so tightly to the old script that you miss the chance to evolve. When you say, "I've always been like this," stop and ask who wrote that line. Was it your parents, your fears, your culture, your wounds? And is it still true, or just familiar? Identity isn't a possession, it's a process. You are not broken for shifting. You are not lost for questioning. You are not fake for wearing many faces. You are human, alive in the paradox of being both the narrator and the narrative. The task isn't to finally discover the real you hidden under all the layers. The task is to become the kind of author who writes honestly, courageously, and with the willingness to revise. Because the story of you isn't finished and it never will be. The illusion of free will. Are we choosing, or just watching? Picture yourself stepping into a futuristic control room, the kind you'd expect in a science fiction film. Lights flicker across walls covered in switches, screens track every possible outcome of your life, and in the center stands a console waiting for your command. You approach with the confidence that you're in charge only to discover that none of the levers respond. The display keeps running, choices unfold, but your input changes nothing. And yet, it all plays out as if you were steering the ship. That sense of being in control feels reassuring, but what if your conscious mind is more like that powerless operator observing, narrating, but not truly deciding? This is the strange possibility raised by modern neuroscience, that free will, as we like to imagine it, might be an elaborate illusion. The idea didn't come from philosophy alone, it came from the lab. In the early 1980s, Benjamin Libet ran a now famous experiment. He asked people to flex their fingers whenever they felt the urge while electrodes tracked brain activity. What he found startled scientists. The brain showed signs of preparing the movement milliseconds before participants consciously decided. This surge of pre-conscious neural activity became known as the readiness potential. In other words, the body acted first, and the conscious mind noticed later. Since then, even more advanced experiments using fMRI have gone further, predicting people's choices seconds before they were aware of them. The predictions aren't flawless, but they're disturbingly accurate. That raises the uncomfortable question: if the brain makes the first move, who or what is actually in charge? One way to see consciousness is as a storyteller rather than a commander. It doesn't initiate so much as explain. Like a press secretary smoothing over inconsistencies for the public, your mind spins a coherent narrative about choices that may already have been set in motion. You think, I wore the red shirt because it looks bold. In reality, subtle cues, temperature, mood, subconscious memories may have tipped the scale before you even noticed. The explanation you give yourself comes after the fact, a justification that makes you feel intentional. This doesn't mean the mind is lying to you maliciously, it means it evolved to create coherence. Survival often depends less on truth than on stability. The illusion of agency holds our moral frameworks, our motivation, and even our sense of self together. Think about how daily life unfolds. Do you really choose your thoughts? A song pops into your head out of nowhere. A phrase slips out of your mouth before you can edit it. Anger surges, desire flares, fear tightens your chest, and none of these experiences arrived by invitation. You didn't decide to crave sugar after years of indulging it, just as you didn't decide your accent or your gut biases. They arose from biology, repetition, and environment. Yet your mind scrambles to tell a story afterward. I bought it because it was on sale, or I yelled because they disrespected me. But those stories are patchwork, comforting illusions sewn over deeper processes that hum below the surface. A haunting metaphor comes to mind. Your mind is a house you only partly know. You decorate the living room, keep the kitchen tidy, and assume that's the whole of it. But behind locked doors lie rooms filled with old memories, forgotten beliefs, inherited instincts, ghosts that stir when you least expect it. You hear a noise upstairs and convince yourself you made it. A chill creeps through the hallway, and you decide it was your choice to shiver. But the house is larger, stranger, and less obedient than you like to admit. The deeper forces, genes, hormones, evolutionary drives, cultural conditioning move through its walls while your conscious mind insists that it is the architect. None of this means we're mechanical robots. You can pause, reflect, redirect skills your biology also handed you. But even those abilities were shaped by neural wiring, experience, and context. You didn't build the system. You inherited it. Free will, then, may not be the power to choose from scratch, but the ability to ride the forces already in motion. Think of a surfer on a wave. The wave is not theirs to command, but they can ride it with grace or fall clumsily. The wave is nature. The ride is art. Free will, if it exists, may be the flickering gap between impulse and response, not infinite freedom but a brief window where awareness can alter trajectory. Consider how circumstances mold us. A child raised in poverty, trauma, or violence does not navigate the same set of inner levers as one raised in safety and love. Our choices sprout from soil we did not choose. That's why compassion matters. When we punish people for bad behavior, we often assume they could have done otherwise. But if their wiring, upbringing, and biology press them toward that act, how fair is pure blame? Responsibility doesn't vanish, but it shifts. It becomes less about moral condemnation and more about stewardship, rehabilitation, and understanding. A justice system built on the illusion of total free will risks cruelty. One built on awareness of constraints could prioritize healing and change. On a personal level, realizing free will's limits can be sobering but also liberating. It teaches humility. Not every thought is yours. Some desires are echoes of advertising, culture, or ancestral fears. Some emotions are conditioned reflexes rather than conscious decisions. Yet this doesn't mean you're powerless. The brain is plastic. Patterns can be reshaped. You cannot rewrite the architecture entirely, but you can remodel, plant new stories, train yourself into new habits. You are less a king ruling a kingdom and more a sailor adjusting sails to winds you didn't summon. Awareness becomes your compass, not omnipotence. What does this mean for self? Perhaps the self is not a sovereign ruler but a dynamic process, currents of biology, culture, and memory forming temporary shapes. Free will, if real, may not be the power to do anything but the awareness of what's already moving you. It is the small space where you notice the puppet strings and, instead of despairing, learn to dance with them. The moment you ask, where did this desire come from? Who planted it? What purpose does it serve? That is where a glimmer of freedom lives. So the next time you act and feel certain, I chose this, pause. Ask where the impulse was born. Was it biology, conditioning, trauma? And then ask what you can do with it now. That pause, that questioning, may be the closest thing to free will we have. The control room still hums, the lights still glow, but the script is already running. Your task is not to write it from scratch but to perform it with awareness, curiosity, and when you can improvise a better ending. The double slit experiment. How observation shapes reality. Imagine standing in front of two doors, side by side. They look ordinary, solid, permanent. You expect to choose one, open it, and walk through without surprise. But instead, as you reach forward, both doors blur, shimmer, and shift, as though your decision to look at them alters what they are. This is not science fiction, it is the strange reality exposed by one of the most puzzling and groundbreaking tests in physics, the double slit experiment. This experiment, deceptively simple yet endlessly profound, shows us something that feels impossible. The very act of observation appears to influence the way reality behaves. In the setup, a particle like an electron is fired toward a barrier with two tiny openings. Behind the barrier is a screen to capture where the particle lands. Common sense says the electron must go through one slit or the other, much like tossing a pebble through a fence. But that isn't what happens. When no one measures which slit the electron passes through, it doesn't act like a solid object at all. Instead, it spreads out like a wave and creates an interference pattern on the screen, a pattern that looks like ripples overlapping in water, suggesting it traveled through both slits simultaneously. Yet when detectors are added to check the path, forcing the question, which slit did it choose? The interference pattern vanishes. The electron behaves like a tiny marble, going through only one slit. And the only thing that changed was the fact that someone looked. The observation itself altered the result. It's as though the particle was undecided, existing in a cloud of possibilities, until observation collapsed that ambiguity into a single outcome. What this means is staggering. Reality does not simply sit out there, waiting for us to passively watch it. The world seems to decide how to show up depending on whether we pay attention. In quantum mechanics, this is described as the collapse of the wave function. Before measurement, particles exist in superposition, a blend of multiple possible states. Observation forces a choice. You might think of this like a story that constantly rewrites itself until you finally open the page and fix the words. But unlike a novel, the universe doesn't have a single finished draft hiding behind the cover. It writes itself in real time as you look. And the deeper you follow this idea, the stranger it becomes. If reality requires observation to finalize, what exactly counts as observation? Is it simply the presence of a detector? Or is it something closer to awareness itself? Physicists have debated this for decades, and while the standard explanation avoids philosophical leaps, others argue that consciousness cannot be ignored. Some suggest that our awareness plays an active role in collapsing potential into actuality. This is controversial, yet the persistence of the question hints at how deeply unsettling the experiment remains. The implications ripple outward like the very interference patterns it produces. For one, it destabilizes our faith in causality. In delayed choice versions of the experiment, the decision to observe is made after the particle has already traveled toward the slits, and still the outcome shifts. It's as though the universe waits to know your future choice before deciding how the past should unfold. This bends the arrow of time, blurring the straightforward line from cause to effect. If B can influence A, then reality isn't simply a sequence of events, it's a network that reshapes itself depending on the perspective through which it's observed. The mathematics of quantum theory supports this. Concepts like superposition, entanglement, and collapse aren't just speculation. They are mathematically precise tools that predict experimental results with astonishing accuracy. And yet, the picture they paint is alien to our everyday intuitions. Instead of a fixed, mechanical universe, we discover a landscape of probabilities, waiting to be called into form. Think about what this means for your life. We are raised to believe the world is a stage already built, and we merely walk upon it. But what if the stage itself changes as we move? What if our questions, our focus, our attention carve the pathways through which reality flows? The double-slit experiment suggests that we are not detached observers of a pre-written universe. We are participants, sculptors shaping outcomes from a block of infinite possibility. This interpretation doesn't mean you can bend reality at will or defy physics, but it does remind you that your role in existence is not trivial. Every observation, every decision, every focus of attention matters. Just as the electron's behavior depends on whether it is watched, your life unfolds according to where you direct your awareness. Infinite versions of your future exist, but only one becomes real when you choose. To make sense of this, picture a dream. In dreams, landscapes shift with your attention, walls dissolve, people transform. Reality bends around where you focus. While waking life feels more stable, quantum mechanics whispers that solidity may also be an illusion, a stability that exists only after the act of observation pins it down. When you realize this, you begin to see yourself differently. You are not a powerless dot in a vast, indifferent cosmos. You are a pivot point, a lens through which the cosmos crystallizes into form. Without observation, the universe hesitates. With it, the fog of potential condenses into experience. This does not reduce you to an observer at a distance, it elevates you into a co-creator. Your attention is not wasted. Your curiosity is not trivial. Each time you look closely, reality sharpens. Each time you turn away, it blurs into probabilities once again. The experiment teaches us that uncertainty is not a mistake in nature, it is the essential backdrop that makes choice, creativity, and discovery possible. If everything were fixed, nothing new could emerge. But because the universe waits, because outcomes are fluid until observed, we live in a cosmos alive with possibility. And that is perhaps the most empowering implication of all. The double-slit experiment does not just tell us about electrons. It tells us about the human condition. It suggests that life itself is participatory, that the universe requires witnesses, not as passive recorders but as active collaborators. You collapse potential futures every day, shaping them into memories, shaping them into your story. And in that sense, the mystery of the quantum realm is not confined to laboratories or equations. It is written into every choice you make, every question you ask, every moment you decide to pay attention. Reality, then, is not a fixed wall you crash into. It is a living canvas you help paint. The question is not whether the universe exists without you, but rather what kind of universe becomes possible because you are here to see it. The hidden divide. Why some minds speak and others stay silent. Most of us assume that the way we experience our thoughts is the same as everyone else's, but in reality, our inner worlds can be shockingly different. Some people move through life with a constant voice narrating, debating, planning, or even criticizing inside their head, while others live with an entirely different kind of mental soundtrack, one that doesn't include words at all. Imagine standing in a crowded train station where announcements echo, schedules flip, and voices call out directions. For many, this is what the inside of their mind feels like: busy, verbal, full of chatter. But for others, it's closer to walking through a quiet field where the air carries impressions, images, and instincts rather than sentences. Both ways of thinking are valid, but realizing that not everyone has an inner voice often feels like stumbling upon a secret dimension of human experience. What makes this divide so fascinating is how invisible it is. We rarely ask each other what thinking feels like because it seems obvious. We treat consciousness as universal when in fact it comes in multiple styles. People with inner dialogue often rehearse conversations before speaking, replay events word for word, or guide themselves step by step through tasks. Those without inner dialogue may process equally complex ideas, but do so through sensations, intuition, or pictures that skip the middleman of language. And until this contrast is explained, both groups usually assume their experience is the default. Once you notice the difference, big questions emerge. Does having an inner monologue make you more self-aware, more intelligent, or more emotionally in tune? Neuroscience suggests the answer is no. Intelligence is not tied to the form thoughts take but to how they are used. Verbal thinkers may excel in writing, debating, or explaining themselves clearly, but non-verbal thinkers often shine in areas requiring visual imagination, pattern recognition, or instinctive decision-making. The variety of cognition is much wider than our education systems or cultural narratives tend to recognize. Growing up, many of us are trained to value verbal skills above all else. Schools reward the ability to write essays, explain reasoning, and participate in discussions, but this framework unintentionally favors those with strong inner dialogue. A student who thinks in images or gut feelings may struggle to put thoughts into words, leading teachers to misinterpret them as disengaged or less capable, even though their mind might be working in an entirely different but equally powerful way. In professional life, this difference also plays out. Someone with a strong internal narrator might thrive in law, literature, or counseling, where precise words are the currency. Meanwhile, someone with a quiet, image-based mind may excel in engineering, design, or art, where visualizing systems and relationships matters more than verbal explanation. Neither is better. They are simply optimized for different environments. These differences also shape memory. A person with inner dialogue might recall a conversation as if replaying a script. She said this, then I responded with that. In contrast, a non-verbal thinker might remember the same moment by recalling the warmth of the room, the color of the sunlight, or the feeling of tension in their chest. Both memories are real, but they're stored in different formats. This raises another point. When we measure memory through verbal recall, we risk underestimating people whose experiences don't naturally fit into words. Relationships can also become complicated by this invisible divide. If you constantly narrate your feelings internally, you may assume your partner does the same. When they struggle to explain what they feel, you might think they are hiding something, when in reality they may not have a ready-made verbal structure to describe their thoughts. Similarly, a non-verbal thinker may perceive a verbal partner as over-explaining or stuck in analysis, when in truth it's just how their mind works. Understanding these differences can reduce conflict and open space for patience. One metaphor is to imagine two houses. One with wide windows, where thoughts pass visibly across in the form of sentences and explanations, and another with mirrors, where thoughts reflect inward as feelings and insights without words. Both houses are full, both are alive, but living inside them feels profoundly different. What fascinates me is how culture has historically glorified the verbal house. Literature, philosophy, and self-help books are filled with inner monologues, with Shakespeare's soliloquies being the classic example. We often equate thinking with talking, assuming silence is emptiness. But silence may simply be a different kind of knowing, one that operates beneath language. Meditation traditions even encourage people with loud inner dialogue to quiet their mental chatter, suggesting that peace of mind comes not from more words but from less. This makes me wonder, is it possible that people without inner speech are naturally closer to that meditative state? That their silence isn't a lack but an advantage in certain contexts? Another interesting angle is creativity. Some of history's most brilliant innovators described thinking in images, shapes, or feelings rather than words. Einstein claimed he thought in visual and muscular sensations, not sentences. Artists and composers often report that their inspiration emerges fully formed as a vision or melody long before they can articulate it. This suggests that not having inner dialogue may actually allow thoughts to bypass the bottleneck of language, surfacing in richer, nonlinear ways. On the flip side, those with strong inner dialogue benefit from being able to analyze, debate, and structure ideas logically before acting. Both modes of thought contribute to human progress in unique ways. Importantly, neither side should feel pressured to fix themselves. People with inner speech sometimes try to silence it through mindfulness when it becomes overwhelming. People without it sometimes try journaling or narrative therapy to develop a stronger verbal track. These practices can be helpful, but the larger message is that difference is not deficiency. The real challenge is in understanding each other and respecting the diversity of mental landscapes. Empathy requires us to stop assuming that others think like we do. We often judge people's intelligence or self-awareness by how clearly they articulate themselves, but articulation is not the same as depth. A person who struggles to verbalize may still be deeply thoughtful, just not in a way that translates into speech. Likewise, someone with a non-stop narrator in their head isn't necessarily more self-aware. They may simply be louder inside. When we recognize this, we open the door to a broader definition of intelligence and connection. Ultimately, the hidden divide between verbal and non-verbal thinkers reminds us that the human mind is not a single blueprint but a spectrum of designs. Some minds speak, others stay silent, and many exist somewhere in between, blending narration with intuition. The next time you notice your own inner voice, pause to consider, not everyone has one, and that's not a flaw but a feature of our cognitive diversity. And if you ever find yourself in silence, it doesn't mean your thoughts have disappeared. Perhaps they are simply taking another form, one that doesn't need words to be real. The fragile illusion of the self, why your brain can be tricked into owning anything. The human brain is an incredible storyteller. One of its strangest tales is about ownership, the simple but profound feeling that your body belongs to you. At first glance, this seems obvious. Your hands are yours, your legs are yours, and no one else can claim them. But science reveals that this sense of ownership is not as unshakable as we think. A famous experiment known as the rubber hand illusion shows just how fragile it can be. Imagine sitting in a lab where your real hand is hidden behind a screen, while a rubber replica lies in front of you in plain sight. A researcher strokes both the hidden real hand and the fake one in perfect synchronization. Within moments, your brain begins to fuse the sensations with the visual feedback. You don't just see the rubber hand being touched, you feel it. And then, astonishingly, you start to believe that the rubber hand is your own. If someone suddenly threatens it with a hammer, your body reacts with genuine fear. The brain has adopted something artificial as part of you. This odd trick reveals a deeper truth. Bodily ownership is not a biological certainty, but a construction your brain assembles moment by moment. We think of our identity as fixed within the body, but in reality, it is more like a flexible canvas painted by perception. When vision, touch, and timing line up, the brain writes a convincing story of ownership even when the body is not real. From an evolutionary perspective, this shortcut makes sense. The brain doesn't pause to philosophize about whether the hand is truly yours, it simply integrates sensory information into a coherent whole. If what you see and what you feel are aligned, then the safest assumption for survival is that the object belongs to you. But the implications stretch far beyond a simple lab trick. Similar illusions have been reproduced in virtual reality, where people come to feel at home inside avatars, mannequins, and even non-human bodies. With the right synchrony of movements and sensations, a participant can feel as if they inhabit a completely foreign form. This suggests that the boundaries of self are negotiable, not absolute. The self is not a solid fortress. It's a flexible pattern, constantly updated by perception. Neurology provides further evidence of this flexibility. Amputees often feel phantom limbs that are no longer physically there. Stroke patients sometimes neglect one side of their body, as if it doesn't belong to them. In rare cases, individuals suffering from conditions like somatoparaphrenia deny ownership of a perfectly functioning limb, insisting it belongs to someone else. These cases may seem bizarre, but when viewed alongside the rubber hand illusion, they underscore the same principle. Our sense of ownership is a fragile construct. What's fascinating is how technology is beginning to exploit this fragility in positive ways. Advanced prosthetics, for instance, are being designed to not only respond to nerve signals but also provide tactile feedback. Users often report that these artificial limbs don't just feel like tools, they feel like genuine extensions of themselves. In some cases, the sense of ownership rivals the feeling they once had for their biological limbs. The brain, it seems, doesn't care whether a limb is flesh or metal. It only cares that the signals make sense. If intention and response match, ownership follows. Virtual reality experiments push this idea even further. By syncing movements with visual feedback, researchers have made people feel embodied in gender-swapped avatars, miniature or giant versions of themselves, and even abstract forms like cubes or floating orbs. The rule is consistent. When perception aligns, the brain stitches together the illusion of self. This adaptability is not a weakness, it's a survival mechanism. It allows humans to merge with tools, adapt to injury, and inhabit new environments, both physical and digital. But there's a philosophical layer too. If the self can be extended into rubber, metal, or pixels, then what does it really mean to be me? For centuries, we assumed that identity was anchored in biology, locked into our flesh and bones. Yet these experiments suggest otherwise. Perhaps identity is less about what we are made of and more about how coherent our experiences feel. The self may not be located in the body at all, but in the harmony of perception. This idea can feel unsettling. If ownership can be manipulated so easily, then how stable is any aspect of the self? Could emotions be manipulated by similar tricks? Could memories be rewritten with synchronized cues? Could our entire sense of continuity, our narrative of being the same person from one day to the next, be hacked by clever illusions? The rubber hand illusion is simple, but it points toward profound questions about free will, memory, and the malleability of consciousness. At the same time, this fragility is also a gift. Without it, humans could not adapt so quickly to change. A rigid sense of self would make recovery from trauma or disability far more difficult. Instead, the brain's flexibility allows people to integrate prosthetics, control robotic limbs with thought, or immerse themselves fully in virtual environments. It explains why a gamer can feel present in a digital world, why a person with paralysis can learn to control a computer with their brain, and why we can extend our sense of self into tools like smartphones or even cars. In each case, the rhythm of intention and response creates the story of ownership. So what does this mean for the future? As technology advances, the line between human and machine will blur even further. Artificial limbs that feel indistinguishable from biological ones may become the norm. Virtual bodies may one day feel as real as physical ones. Brain-computer interfaces could let us extend our sense of self into entire digital landscapes. The rubber hand illusion was just the beginning. It was a primitive demonstration of a much larger truth. The boundaries of self are elastic. In the end, the most astonishing part is not that the brain can be fooled, but that the illusion of self is always being constructed in the first place. Even now, as you feel your hands, your breath, your posture, your brain is weaving together countless signals into a seamless experience of being you. It is an act of trust in timing, coherence, and harmony. You are not just your body. You are the story your brain tells about owning it. And that story, strange as it sounds, can extend to anything, even a hand made of rubber. The illusion of choice. How your brain decides before you do. Imagine sitting in the cockpit of your own life, surrounded by switches, levers, and flashing buttons. You believe you're in command, weighing options, then deliberately moving forward with your chosen action. Maybe it's as simple as deciding between cereal or eggs for breakfast. You pause, think, choose, and it feels like the decision is yours. But what if the sensation of choice is less about steering and more about watching a pre-recorded performance? What if the conscious, you, is more of a commentator than a commander? This is where neuroscience enters with unsettling evidence. Brain scans suggest that what feels like a deliberate choice may actually be the final act of a script already written milliseconds earlier in the unconscious. The brain predicts, initiates, and only then informs the mind that you chose. That dashboard of lights you thought you were piloting, it might just be a stage set for your awareness, a convincing simulation of control. This doesn't mean life is meaningless, it means the mechanics of choice are stranger and subtler than we imagine. A helpful metaphor is that of a magician. When you watch a magic trick, you see what looks like free selection, but behind the curtain the outcome was nudged, engineered, or predicted. Your astonishment doesn't come from randomness, but from how well the setup concealed its structure. Similarly, the brain prepares actions before consciousness registers intent, then retrofits a narrative that makes sense of what already happened. Neuroscientist Benjamin Libet's experiments in the 1980s remain striking. Participants thought they pressed a button by free will, yet their brain activity indicated the decision was underway before conscious awareness arrived. Later studies using fMRI pushed this window back seconds, predicting choices well before the participant reported them. The driver seems late to the car. This idea can sound bleak, like we are marionettes of biology, but it's worth pausing here. Because what the science shows is not the absence of influence, but a redefinition of where influence operates. Conscious will isn't a lever that suddenly commands the body. Instead, it's a feedback system layered atop predictive processing. Think of it like this. When you read a sentence, you anticipate the next word, and often your brain knows it before your eyes confirm it. Decisions are similar. The predictive model draws from memory, context, and experience to set up likely outcomes. Consciousness then steps in, not as originator, but as narrator and adjuster. This isn't fiction, it's survival. Brains that anticipate faster than reflection allow us to act before danger strikes. You don't calculate whether to pull your hand from a hot stove. It happens. Later, you explain it as your choice. The deeper insight is that choice emerges from a network, not a throne. The self is more committee than king. Neural impulses, habits, emotions, memories, and social feedback collide and converge into an action, and your awareness arrives in time to make sense of it. What looks like sovereignty is more like consensus. Yet here's the fascinating twist. Even if free will in the old metaphysical sense doesn't exist, we can still meaningfully shape our lives. Because what we feed the brain, our habits, environments, education, and reflections, becomes the training data for future predictions. You can't will yourself into instantly being patient, but you can practice meditation until patience becomes the predicted default. You can't simply wish away addiction, but you can condition neural pathways so that craving signals lose strength. In other words, while you may not handcraft each decision at the moment of choice, you absolutely sculpt the system that produces those decisions. Consider language. Words appear on your lips not because you deliberately choose each one, but because they flow from patterns encoded through years of use. Writing feels guided, but most of it is prediction flowing into coherence. This doesn't strip meaning, it reveals why practice matters. Every habit is like coding the autopilot. A pianist rehearses scales until fingers move faster than thought. A monk trains attention until distracting impulses fade before they catch. A lawyer internalizes arguments until they surface without hesitation. None of this disproves freedom. It reframes it as shaping probabilities rather than commanding outcomes. So when we ask, do we really have free will? The answer may be, not in the way we think, but in a deeper way we didn't expect. It's not a blank slate, sovereign freedom, but an emergent influence within the complexity of brain and environment. Like a gardener, you don't order the rain or sun, but you choose what to plant, what to prune, what to nurture. Over time, the garden looks like your intention, even if you never controlled the weather. This perspective also reshapes morality. If people don't choose in a vacuum, what does that mean for responsibility? The answer is pragmatic. Accountability isn't about metaphysical freedom, it's about conditioning behavior. Laws, rewards, and punishments all work by feeding back into the predictive system, teaching the brain which actions are costly or beneficial. Praise and blame still matter not because someone could have done otherwise in some absolute sense, but because reinforcement reshapes future predictions. Society is built on this understanding, even if unstated. Rather than seeing yourself as a lone pilot commanding from above, it may be more accurate to picture yourself as the whole system: the plane, the autopilot, the weather data, the turbulence, and yes, the awareness in the cockpit. The pilot is not separate. The pilot is part of the plane. And this broader picture may be more empowering than the old myth of isolated free will, because it highlights how deeply habits, environments, and reflections matter. You are sculpting the autopilot constantly. Even small choices: what media you consume, who you spend time with, what practices you engage in, become seeds that change the trajectory of future, automatic, actions. So the illusion of free will is not that you have no influence, but that you mistake where influence lies. It's less about pulling levers at the moment, more about programming the system over time. When the brain presents you with urges, thoughts, or inclinations, you can't stop them from arising. But you can influence which ones repeat, which ones win out, which ones define you tomorrow. That is the real authorship, curating the conditions of your own mind. So, the next time you feel yourself choosing whether to speak, move, resist, or indulge, pause not to ask whether the choice is metaphysically free, but to notice the forces that shaped it: habit, memory, environment, emotion. This awareness alone expands agency, because noticing the trick is the first step in influencing the performance. You are not simply the passenger of the autopilot. You are the system that trains it. And in that sense, while you may not have the freedom you once imagined, you have something perhaps more powerful: the ability to rewrite the code, slowly, patiently, deliberately. And what grows from that rewriting is what we call identity, purpose, and meaning. The looping universe, living inside eternity's endless cycle. The universe may not be a straight arrow of time racing from birth to death, but a circular cosmic loop without true beginning or final end. Imagine a horizontal clock. No hands, no numbers, no ticking mechanism, only a seamless curve forever folding back on itself. That's the unsettling possibility suggested by the cyclic universe hypothesis, an idea that questions whether our reality isn't a single event, but an infinite rhythm of expansion, collapse, and renewal. The thought alone blurs the line between science and philosophy, because if this cycle is real, then everything you know, your memories, your life, even this very moment, may have happened before, and might happen again. We often tell the story of the cosmos as if it were a one-act play. Roughly 13.8 billion years ago, all space, energy, and time itself erupted in what we call the Big Bang. Since then, galaxies have streamed apart, stars ignited, planets formed, and eventually, life and consciousness appeared. But perhaps this beginning wasn't the first curtain rise, but only the most recent. Instead of a unique explosion, the Big Bang might have been just one beat in an eternal cosmic heartbeat. Physicists who explore this model argue that the universe could work like breath: inhale, exhale, expand, collapse, live, die, then repeat. This perspective isn't pulled from science fiction. It grows out of mathematical extensions of Einstein's relativity and modern theories like string cosmology. If true, it would mean that the death of a universe isn't final, it's only a transformation. Space itself could shrink back into an unimaginably dense state, Big Crunch, which might then ignite into another Big Bang. Each collapse could erase history, but create fresh conditions for galaxies, stars, and perhaps intelligent beings to emerge again. Here's the twist. If physical laws remain consistent across cycles, the configurations of matter could repeat. That means not just a universe like ours could arise, but potentially this very universe, down to your exact thoughts and experiences. This idea eerily echoes the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche's thought experiment of eternal recurrence. Nietzsche asked whether, if you had to live your life endlessly on repeat, you would embrace it or despair. What he posed as a psychological challenge may find grounding in cosmology. The repetition may not be metaphorical, it could be physical, hardwired into the fabric of time. Of course, modern science tempers this with uncertainty. The dominant cosmological model today says the universe is expanding at an accelerating pace, thanks to dark energy, a mysterious force that drives galaxies apart faster and faster. If this acceleration continues unchecked, the universe faces a bleak fate, a heat death, where everything drifts into darkness, stars burn out, matter decays, and the cosmos freezes into silence. But some researchers suggest dark energy may not be constant. If it weakens or reverses, expansion could slow, halt, and eventually reverse. What follows would be a catastrophic contraction, a slow but unstoppable collapse of every structure back into a singularity. And from that dense nothingness, a new bang. This model has fascinating implications. It explains why the universe looks so smooth and uniform, why the laws of physics seem finely tuned, and why matter clusters in ways that seem improbable. In a one-shot universe, these conditions feel coincidental, almost suspiciously lucky. But in an endless cycle, imperfections can iron themselves out over repeated attempts. Like an artist sketching draft after draft, the cosmos could refine itself through repetition, until the balance we see today emerges naturally. But let's step away from the physics for a moment and confront the psychological weight of this idea. If everything repeats, does that diminish the value of our choices? Or does it magnify them? On one hand, repetition might feel suffocating. What use is striving if you're destined to relive it all again? On the other hand, repetition could be liberating. If life is replayed infinitely, then each act carries an eternal echo. A single kindness, a fleeting joy, a courageous choice all reverberate across cycles without end. Perhaps what matters isn't permanence, but resonance. Imagine the universe like a scratched vinyl record. The song plays, the groove deepens, and at just the right moment, the needle skips backward. The music continues, sounding fresh, yet it's repeating. We listeners may never realize the loop, because inside the song, time feels seamless. The cyclic universe could work the same way. The collapse, the bang, the expansion, it's the same refrain, but from within, it feels like a new story. You breathe, you love, you lose, the stars burn, the stars fade, and then, without memory, the record begins again. Recent theories even add new layers. In some string theory models, our universe is just one of many brains, in higher dimensions, colliding periodically to trigger new bangs. In loop quantum gravity, space-time itself may bounce instead of breaking, creating a natural cycle of universes. None of these are proven, but they are mathematically consistent and taken seriously because they address deep cosmological puzzles. The most haunting part, though, is memory, or rather, its absence. When one universe ends, the slate is wiped clean. No galaxy, no star, no mind survives the transition. The new universe doesn't inherit a memory chip. It starts fresh, unburdened by what came before. So even if this cycle has spun an infinite number of times, you, right now, have no way of knowing. Each universe feels unique because it is, even if it's structurally identical to its predecessors. This shifts how we might think about life and meaning. If endings are beginnings, then death may not be finality, but pivot. Not an abyss, but a hinge. The universe folds in, then bursts outward again, trading masks but never ceasing the performance. And here's the challenge it poses. If you knew your life might repeat forever, would you live differently? Would you embrace each choice as if it rippled through eternity? Maybe that's the gift of this unsettling idea. It reframes life not as a fragile, one-time spark, but as a verse in an endless song. Your voice might vanish, but the melody continues. And though the next, you, won't remember, maybe just maybe the echo of kindness, courage, or love survives in the pattern, etched into the groove of the cosmos itself. The cyclic universe is not merely a hypothesis about physics, it's a mirror we hold up to ourselves. It asks us how we'd act if the stage never closed, if the curtains always rose again. It asks whether we'd say yes to the loop. And perhaps the most important question is not whether it's true, but whether you can live as if it is. Because in doing so, you treat this breath, this fleeting moment, not as expendable, but as eternal. And maybe that is the point. The hidden brain in your gut, how microbes shape your mind and decisions. Your gut can guide your decisions in ways you barely notice. Most of us like to think of ourselves as rational beings, captains of our thoughts, in full control of what we buy, who we trust, what we fear, and even whom we love. But beneath that sense of conscious choice, something else is working quietly, influencing us from below the surface. Deep inside your abdomen, there's an ancient system, a silent partner that doesn't think in words or logic, yet holds tremendous sway over how you feel, react, and decide. It flutters when you're nervous, tightens when danger lurks, and sometimes even overrules your rational mind. This isn't mystical language. It's biology. Your digestive system is not just processing food, it's processing reality. Science has revealed that your gut contains a network of over 100 million neurons, a system so complex that some neuroscientists call it the second brain. But that label might be misleading, because the gut doesn't merely take orders from the brain. It operates in parallel, carrying out decisions, sending warnings, and influencing moods without asking for your conscious approval. This gut-brain axis communicates constantly through the vagus nerve, a kind of electrical superhighway connecting your abdomen to your mind. It doesn't just regulate digestion, it can alter your emotions, cloud your thoughts, and even shift your moral judgment. Think about that, the unease you feel in a certain room, the sudden sense of trust with a stranger, the way your mood changes for no obvious reason. These may not be entirely your choices. They may be signals rising from your gut. A striking example comes from research into the microbiome, the trillions of bacteria and microbes living inside you. These organisms aren't just passive passengers. They help produce neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, and GABA, chemicals we used to believe came only from the brain. In fact, over 90% of your serotonin is created in your gut. That means your feelings of happiness, calm, or connection are, in part, bacterial byproducts. Studies have shown that altering the microbiome can reshape emotional responses. In one experiment, participants given probiotics reacted differently to stressful images compared to those without the same gut support. Their emotional intensity shifted simply because their gut chemistry had been altered. So the question is, are you feeling joy, fear, or love purely because of you? Or is it a chorus of invisible organisms whispering through your bloodstream? This influence extends beyond emotions into personality and behavior. Animal studies show that transplanting gut microbes from a bold mouse into a timid one makes the timid mouse bolder. Early human research suggests similar patterns. People with depression or anxiety often have disrupted gut flora, and adjusting it with targeted probiotics sometimes reduces symptoms. If this holds true on a broader scale, what we consider mental health problems may sometimes be microbial imbalances masquerading as emotional struggles. It challenges the way we think about responsibility. If your microbiome can shape risk-taking, fear, and even trust, then part of your personality may not be written in your brain but in your intestines. But why would evolution hand so much power to the gut? The answer lies in survival. The gut is the body's front line with the outside world, filtering everything you consume, food, toxins, bacteria. Because of this, evolution built a decision-making shortcut. While the brain is slow, deliberate, and reflective, the gut reacts quickly and instinctively. If something smells rotten or feels dangerous, the gut doesn't wait for analysis, it triggers nausea, tension, or withdrawal immediately. That gut feeling that steers you away from certain foods or certain people isn't just superstition. It's your body protecting itself with speed and precision. In some cases, it knows the truth before your conscious brain does. Researchers studying decision-making have even discovered something called the readiness potential, where your body begins preparing for an action milliseconds before you're consciously aware of choosing it. Now, similar early signals are being found in the gut. That means your intestines may literally initiate reactions before you even know you've decided. You think you're making a choice, when in fact, your gut already cast the vote and simply notified your brain afterward. What you call intuition may be your gut handing you the conclusion while your brain invents a story to justify it. This perspective raises uncomfortable but fascinating questions. If microbes and gut signals influence decisions, how far does that influence reach? Could your gut shape your political leanings, your moral instincts, your relationships? Emerging research suggests correlations between microbiome profiles and social bonding, risk tolerance, and even patterns of fear. While we don't yet have definitive answers, the possibility forces us to reconsider human identity. You are not just a single self. You are an ecosystem, a walking parliament of human cells and bacterial citizens negotiating every moment of your life. Understanding this doesn't mean surrendering to determinism. It's not about saying, "My microbes made me do it." Instead, it's an invitation to humility and self-awareness. Many of the things we blame ourselves for, mood swings, irrational fears, even sudden cravings, might not originate in conscious thought. And many of the instincts we dismiss, like that twist in your stomach before a bad decision, may be deeply wise signals honed by millions of years of survival. Rather than seeing the gut as an enemy or a mere digestive system, we should view it as a co-pilot. Its messages may be cryptic, but they are rarely meaningless. So what does this mean for everyday life? It means the food you eat doesn't just fuel your body, it shapes your mind. A diet that nourishes healthy microbes may also nurture emotional stability and clear thinking. It means stress isn't just in your head. It can inflame the gut, which in turn clouds your judgment. It means when you feel strangely drawn to or repelled by someone, part of that could be the bacteria in your gut interpreting him as safe or unsafe before you can explain why. Ultimately, being human is less about a single rational brain commanding a body and more about a dynamic marketplace of signals, neurons, hormones, microbes, all contributing to what we call you. This doesn't diminish your humanity. On the contrary, it expands it. You are not a solitary self trapped in a skull. You are a living network, a colony whose consciousness floats above an ancient chorus of microbes and neurons. Recognizing this doesn't rob you of agency, it refines it. It reminds you to nourish your body wisely, to respect your instincts, and to forgive yourself for feelings that may not be fully under your control. So the next time your stomach knots before a choice, consider that it might not be weakness or fear. It could be truth vibrating from the deepest part of your being. The gut is not just a digestive organ. It's an ancient oracle, whispering survival lessons through the chemistry of life itself. Not all wisdom wears a crown. Some of it grows in the dark, unseen, carried on the wings of microbes, shaping the theater of your mind with every beat of your heart. The universe without a center, expansion, illusion, and the meaning of now. Most of us grew up with simple metaphors for the universe, like a balloon inflating or a firework exploding outward from a single point. Teachers tried to make the incomprehensible feel familiar, giving us pictures of a cosmic bang that pushed everything away from a central spot. It's a comforting idea because it matches how humans think about explosions, ripples, and movement. But reality is far stranger. The universe has no center. There's no middle, no edge, no border where you could stand and point and say, here's where it all began. And yet, paradoxically, the universe is expanding everywhere at once. This isn't mystical poetry. It's physics, and it has been observed in the redshift of galaxies, the stretching of light as space itself elongates. To understand this, you have to let go of Earth-shaped intuition and embrace something more alien. A better picture than the balloon is bread dough rising in an oven. Inside the dough are raisins, representing galaxies. As the dough stretches, the raisins don't fly away from a special core. Instead, every raisin sees every other one drifting farther away, as though each raisin is the center of expansion. From any perspective inside the loaf, it looks as if everything is moving outward from you, and yet there is no true middle. That's the universe we live in. But then comes the deeper question that rattles the mind. If space is expanding, what is it expanding into? Our instinct wants an outside, a room, a backdrop. The unsettling truth is that there is no outside. Space isn't moving into something else, it is creating itself. The void between galaxies wasn't there before. It comes into being as the universe stretches. That's why the Big Bang is so easy to misunderstand. It wasn't an explosion in space. It was the creation of space, of time, of matter and energy together. Imagine not sparks shooting outward into emptiness, but emptiness itself being woven thread by thread. That is the stage on which galaxies play their part. And it gets even stranger. This expansion is not slowing down. When scientists first measured cosmic redshift, they expected galaxies to drift apart more slowly over time, like shrapnel losing momentum. Instead, the opposite was true. Galaxies are fleeing faster and faster, as if some invisible pressure is stretching the fabric beneath them. We call this dark energy, not because we understand it, but because we don't. The name is a label for our ignorance. And it's this mysterious pressure that ensures no center exists. If expansion comes equally from within every patch of the cosmos, then every point is equally the origin and equally nowhere. What makes this so hard for us to accept is not just the physics, but the psychology. Human beings crave order. We like to draw circles around things, to say this is the middle, this is the edge, this is the start and finish. We want a story with a beginning, climax, and end. But the universe doesn't seem to care about our storytelling habits. It was under no obligation to make its structure intuitive to apes on a small blue planet. The Big Bang wasn't fireworks. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even visible in the way we imagine. It was a silent change in the rules of reality, an unfolding that wrote the stage directions for everything that followed: galaxies, stars, life, and eventually, us. But because it happened everywhere at once, there is nowhere to point and say, there it began. The origin was not geographical. It was structural, like a rule suddenly coming into effect. And from then on, everything else has been playing out within that rule. Think of what this means for our place in the cosmos. From our perspective, Earth seems central. We measure other galaxies moving away and it looks as if we're standing still while the rest of the universe drifts outward. But someone in another galaxy, billions of light years away, sees the same thing. To them, it appears they're in the center and we're the ones moving away. Both views are correct, and neither is privileged. That is the trick of relativity. Every observer feels stationary, while everything else appears in motion. Imagine being on a train in the dark, surrounded by windows, watching distant lights drift away. You cannot tell if you're moving, if they are, or if the track itself is stretching under you. That's what the universe is like. There is no train station, no ultimate anchor, only relative motion within a shifting fabric. And this has eerie consequences. If expansion continues, as current evidence suggests, then galaxies far away will eventually slip beyond visibility. Their light will never reach us again, not because they've disappeared, but because the space in between has grown too large for light to cross. Over unimaginable time, the universe will become lonelier. We may one day see only our local cluster of galaxies, surrounded by darkness, the memory of a wider cosmos erased by distance. Expansion creates, but it also isolates. There is also a profound existential undertone here. Humans long to be at the center of things, Earth at the center of the solar system, our species at the center of meaning, ourselves at the center of attention. But the cosmos refuses to indulge that desire. There is no middle. There is no throne at the heart of reality. And strangely enough, that is liberating. Because if every point is equally central, then you, where you stand right now, are as central as anything could be. You are surrounded by the unfolding just as much as a galaxy 10 billion light years away. The Big Bang echoes in your very atoms, in the hydrogen and carbon that were forged in early stars. You are not the center, but you are also not peripheral. You are woven into the fabric that stretches everywhere. This leads to a metaphor not about galaxies, but about you. Perhaps the best way to internalize a centerless universe is to reflect it inward. Think of your life not as a straight road from one point to another, but as an expansion. Your ideas grow in every direction. Your relationships, your knowledge, your resilience, these are like galaxies spreading apart as new space opens up. You don't expand into something pre-existing. You create the room for yourself as you go. That's why meaning feels slippery. It isn't a fixed point to be discovered. It's generated in the spaces between things, between people, between choices, between moments. And maybe this is the quiet lesson of cosmology, that we don't need a universal center to feel significant. The absence of a cosmic throne doesn't make life empty, it makes it equally radiant everywhere. The universe is not a stage with a spotlight, but a song echoing in all directions at once. And you are one of those echoes. So next time you look at the night sky, don't waste energy asking where the center is. There isn't one, there is only the now, only the unfolding fabric of reality, and only you breathing, wondering, existing inside a miracle of endless expansion. The hidden mind, how your unconscious shapes reality. Most of the brain's work is invisible, happening long before you notice it. If you think of your mind as a theater, what you consciously experience is only the actor standing under the spotlight. But behind the curtain, a vast crew of processes is silently arranging props, changing the lighting, and setting the stage so the story flows. Neuroscience suggests that this hidden crew is in charge of more than we like to admit. We tell ourselves we're the authors of our choices, but in truth, we often discover our thoughts after they've already been formed. Experiments show that neural activity predicting a decision can be detected seconds before we consciously feel like we chose it. That doesn't mean free will is meaningless, it means the stage is set earlier than we realize. What you call a decision is more like a conscious stamp of approval on a process already underway. Think about how often you act on autopilot, driving the same route home without recalling the turns, or typing a password without thinking of the letters. These are not minor tasks. They involve complex motor coordination, memory, and awareness, yet they unfold beneath deliberate control. Consciousness is like the tip of an iceberg, it gives the illusion of steering while the bulk remains submerged. Take vision as an example. We assume that we open our eyes and directly see reality, but that's not what happens. What you see is actually a constructed image. Fragments of light signals are combined with memory, prediction, and inference to form something usable. This is why optical illusions trick you. Your brain prioritizes usefulness over accuracy. In other words, you never see the world as it is. You see the version your unconscious mind decides will serve you best. And vision is only one layer. Hearing is reconstructed too. Your brain fills in missing sounds in a noisy room. Memory isn't a replay but a rebuilding each time you recall it, vulnerable to distortion. Emotions emerge faster than your rational mind can explain them. You feel fear before you know what scared you. Your body tenses, heart rate rises, and then the conscious narrator invents a story to explain it. You think, I'm afraid because of that shadow, when in truth, the physiological storm began seconds earlier. This delay is critical. It means that what you call awareness is often just catching up. You're reading the news headlines after the event, not reporting it live. And this lag reveals something uncomfortable. The conscious self might not be the commander, but more of a spokesperson. Still, that doesn't make the unconscious mind alien or hostile. It's just a part you don't have direct access to. Consider instincts. You walk into a room and instantly feel tension, or meet someone and feel inexplicably drawn to them. We romanticize this as intuition, almost mystical. But really it's computation. Your brain has absorbed countless patterns, body language, tone of voice, past experiences, and cross-references them in milliseconds. What feels like a gut reaction is the product of pattern recognition too fast for words. In this sense, instinct isn't magic. It's math performed silently by billions of neurons. The unconscious also regulates everything that keeps you alive. Breathing, heartbeat, digestion, immune responses, even pupil dilation depending on emotion. These are not passive systems. They respond dynamically to context and stress, always keeping balance. When you sleep, the brain prunes connections, files memories, strengthens useful patterns, and quietly edits who you are by morning. It also sustains the illusion of a continuous self. That sense of being a single narrator moving through time is a story constructed moment to moment. Without it, the chaos of competing impulses and scattered experiences would overwhelm you. The unconscious keeps the story consistent, even bending reality to maintain coherence. It fills gaps, hides contradictions, and creates a smooth version of events. This isn't lying for the sake of deception, it's lying for survival. Conscious attention is expensive, slow, and limited. The brain uses it sparingly, like a flashlight in the dark. Most of the heavy lifting is outsourced to unconscious processing, which is faster and more efficient. That's why once you've mastered a skill walking, speaking, driving, it gets handed off to the background systems. Consciousness only steps in when novelty or conflict appears. From an evolutionary perspective, this division makes sense. A creature that wasted resources analyzing every tiny action would not survive. Efficiency demands automaticity. But here's the paradox. Because most of life runs on autopilot, much of you is happening outside of your awareness. So who are you really, the voice in your head, or the entire orchestra beneath it? That question shakes identity itself. If your thoughts are discovered rather than created, if your emotions rise before explanation, then the self you cling to is more fragile than you think. Yet fragility doesn't mean insignificance. The conscious mind plays a role. It integrates, reflects, and allows for deliberate change. It's like the conductor of an orchestra. It may not play the instruments, but it coordinates, slows down, or accelerates the tempo when needed. Knowing this changes how you see responsibility. Instead of believing you consciously choose everything, you can recognize the influence of hidden forces. Biases, habits, and subtle cues shape behavior without permission. Awareness of this doesn't remove the unconscious, but it does give you a tool, meta-awareness. By observing yourself, by practicing mindfulness, you create space in that critical gap between stimulus and response. In that space lies the possibility of steering rather than being steered. Imagine your unconscious as an ocean. The conscious self is a ripple on its surface. Ripples cannot control the sea, but they can ride its currents, learn its patterns, and sometimes redirect small flows. By listening to the unconscious through dreams, instincts, and body signals, you tap into deeper intelligence. You don't control it, but you can collaborate with it. Rather than resisting the hidden mind, you can treat it as a partner. That's the real insight here. The unconscious is not your enemy. It's the foundation of your survival and your sense of self. It shapes the reality you perceive, smooths chaos into story, and allows you to live without drowning in complexity. Consciousness, then, is not diminished by this truth. It's redefined. You are not simply the captain at the helm, but also the ship, the ocean, and the unseen currents beneath. To embrace that is not to lose freedom, but to understand freedom differently, as a dance between what you know and what silently guides you. The more you respect that hidden architecture, the more you realize that understanding doesn't always come from analyzing harder. Sometimes it comes from quieting the chatter, noticing subtle signals, and allowing the deeper layers of your mind to speak. Because ultimately, the conscious self is not separate from the unconscious. It is its echo, its ripple, its storyteller. To live wisely is to honor both, the voice on stage, and the vast machinery humming just out of sight. Posture is a prophecy, how your body shapes your mind. We often assume that thoughts emerge exclusively from the brain, as if the mind is a sealed chamber untouched by the body. But this belief is misleading. The way you hold yourself, the tilt of your head, the slope of your shoulders, the openness of your stance quietly scripts the story your brain begins to tell. Posture is not just a physical arrangement of bones and muscles. It is a form of communication, a silent dialogue between the body and the mind. And what's astonishing is how persuasive that dialogue is. A confident stance can spark real confidence. A slouched spine can invite despair. The shape of the body becomes the tone of your inner monologue. Think about it this way. The body is like a tuning fork. Every gesture, every alignment, vibrates through the nervous system, sending subtle signals that reshape your psychology. When you slump into yourself, eyes downcast, your brain does not interpret this as neutral. It assumes defeat, caution, withdrawal. When you expand, chin lifted, chest open, the message is, we are capable, we are ready. And your brain, eager to respond, produces chemicals, emotions, and expectations that align with that story. You feel anxious or empowered not simply because of circumstances, but because of the posture you inhabit. Science backs this up. Numerous studies in psychology show that expansive postures, so-called power poses, lead people to feel bolder, more resilient, even more willing to take risks. Hormone levels follow suit. Testosterone tends to rise with upright postures, while cortisol, the stress hormone, increases when the body curls inward. In other words, body chemistry dances to the music of posture. It isn't metaphorical, it's measurable. The difference between approaching life with courage or retreat often begins with nothing more than how you carry yourself. But posture doesn't just shape mood, it alters perception. Imagine approaching a narrow bridge stretched over a deep ravine. If you step toward it tall and steady, shoulders back, your brain interprets this as readiness, and courage flows. The same bridge, approached hunched and hesitant, is read as danger, and your brain delivers fear. The world hasn't changed. Your stance has. Even in everyday contexts, posture affects self-respect, focus, and even memory. Studies have shown that children sitting upright retain information better, and older adults engaging in posture-based therapies not only move better but also think more clearly. The body is not separate from thought. It is its stage. Yet posture is not only about performance, it is also about history. Those who have experienced chronic stress or trauma often adopt protective body language, crossed arms, collapsed shoulders, tight jaws. Over time these become habitual, like armor that no longer feels like a choice. The problem is that this armor doesn't just guard, it imprisons. It keeps the mind in a defensive loop, filtering life through old wounds. A lowered chin signals submission, averted eyes whisper doubt, and curled shoulders reinforce fear. This silent language conditions perception, making the present feel like a repeat of the past. Here lies the paradox. If posture can imprison, it can also free. Just as the body can trap the mind in fear, it can liberate it through intentional shifts. Standing tall even when it feels unnatural, opening your chest even when your instinct is to protect, these choices send new signals. They say, we are safe. We can open, we can rise, and the brain, faithful interpreter of physical cues, responds by softening old fears and rewriting its expectations. Practices like yoga, tai chi, or mindful breathing are not simply exercise routines. They are languages of liberation. They teach the body to tell a different story, one of openness, flexibility, and strength, and the mind listens, recalibrates, and heals. The subtlety of posture is what makes it so powerful. Even tiny adjustments, how you angle your neck while using a phone, how you rest your hands, whether you collapse or engage your core while sitting, can alter mood and focus. Most of us drift through life like instruments, unaware we are constantly playing. But the music of posture never stops. Each small gesture is a verse in the poem of your identity. Consider this. Posture is a prophecy. When you walk tall, you don't just appear confident, you become confident. When you slump, you don't just look tired, your brain begins to embody fatigue. This is not about fake bravado. It is about the feedback loop between body and mind. The signals you send outward eventually come back inward. Just as repeated affirmations can shift belief, repeated postures can shift psychology. In fact, posture is often more effective than affirmations because the body bypasses intellectual doubt. You can argue with words in your head, but it is harder to argue with the grounded, undeniable signal of your own stance. This insight changes how we approach mental health and personal growth. Instead of viewing the body as merely a vehicle, we can see it as an active partner in shaping thought. The angle of your chin can alter confidence. The openness of your chest can influence how much joy you feel. Your breath, your gait, your stillness, these are not trivial. They are the grammar of being human. They shape the meaning you extract from life. So what do we do with this knowledge? We begin small. When doubt creeps in, we stand up. When anxiety closes us off, we open our shoulders. When fear makes us shrink, we stretch upward. Each act is like rewriting a line in a story that once felt predetermined. You are not locked into the posture life handed you. You can choose a new stance, and with it, a new mindset. The lesson is simple, ancient, and profound. Change your posture, and you change your path. Because thought is not born in isolation. It emerges from the slope of your spine, the depth of your breath, the openness of your gestures. The body is not a passenger but a guide, a conductor of the orchestra of your mind. And when you align with this truth, you discover that clarity, courage, and joy were never absent. They were waiting in the simple act of standing tall. When the mirror doesn't recognize you, identity, reflection, and the self. Imagine walking past a mirror and for a split second the person looking back feels unfamiliar. Not in a poetic, I don't know who I am anymore, way, but in a raw, disorienting sense that the reflection is both you and not you. There's actually a rare neurological condition called mirror self-misidentification where this disconnect becomes permanent. People who live with it can stare into a mirror and be utterly convinced that the face staring back is a stranger's. What's remarkable is they haven't lost their memories or forgotten their names, it's just that something in the brain stops linking their inner sense of self with the external image. But here's the part that's both unsettling and deeply relatable. You don't need to have a disorder to brush against this experience. Most of us have, in subtle ways, lived it. You've paused at your reflection in a shop window and thought, that doesn't look like me. You've listened to a recording of your own voice and felt it belonged to someone else. These moments aren't mistakes. They're glimpses of the fragile way our brain stitches together identity. We think we carry a clear, permanent picture of ourselves, but we don't. What we have is a constantly updating sketch. A patchwork of memory, mood, expectation, and habit. And sometimes the image your brain prefers doesn't line up with what the mirror gives you back. That clash can feel eerie. It's as though you're meeting your own ghost. Scientists describe vision itself as delayed interpretation. Your eyes pull in light, but your brain translates it a fraction of a second later, filling in blanks with predictions. That means even in the act of seeing your own face, part of what you're perceiving is not reality but assumption. This explains why we can feel shocked when a photograph or mirror doesn't look like us. It isn't that the mirror lied. It's that the brain hesitated, revealing how fragile the bridge between inner identity and outer image really is. And that hesitation isn't only visual, it's emotional. People who live with depersonalization describe looking at their own face as if they were watching an actor perform their movements. Even when they know logically, that's me, it doesn't feel like it. Their reflection becomes a stage, their body a costume, their gestures mechanical. But you don't need a diagnosis to feel shades of this. Stress, grief, burnout, even the relentless performance of daily life can make your reflection feel alien. You look into the mirror and instead of reassurance, you feel estrangement. You find yourself asking not, how do I look? But, who is that? Mirrors, in their stark honesty, don't show your story. They don't reveal your sacrifices, your values, the invisible labor that shaped you. They only return surfaces, hair, skin, posture, lines. And in that flat honesty, there can be cruelty. Because while the world tells us to find truth in appearance, what we actually need is truth in meaning. The mirror can't tell you who you've become, it can only remind you that you've changed. And sometimes that reminder unsettles us because our inner portrait hasn't caught up. There's a modern twist here. We no longer just see our reflection in mirrors. We see it refracted through photos, videos, filters, feeds. Our identity gets fragmented across platforms until it becomes harder to know which version is real. Is it the smiling face you posted online, the tired late-night one, or the one strangers catch on the street? Narcissus was destroyed by falling in love with his reflection, but our danger is the opposite, losing faith in ours. Scrolling through your own selfies and feeling none of them capture you isn't vanity. It's alienation. It's the subtle exile of not recognizing yourself in the image world reflects back. And the more we perform, the more pressure there is to keep these versions consistent, to keep up the brand of me. That weight can make identity feel less like a compass and more like a weather vane, spinning with every gust of attention and expectation. But here's the hopeful counterpoint. The mirror was never meant to define you. It was never proof of your identity. At best, it's a canvas, a temporary snapshot shaped by angle, lighting, and moment. If you look into it and don't recognize yourself, it may not mean you're lost. It may mean you've outgrown the old image your brain still clings to. The hairstyle that once signified confidence, the body that once signified worth, the expression that once meant failure, those are learned associations. And learned associations can be unlearned. Identity is not a photograph to be preserved. It's a conversation you keep having with yourself. And conversations change. The person you see in the mirror isn't supposed to be static. They're meant to evolve, to surprise you, to remind you that life leaves traces. Lines, scars, softened expressions aren't evidence of a stranger. They're evidence of chapters. To recognize yourself doesn't mean freezing time, it means staying curious enough to meet your reflection again and again with fresh eyes. And when you feel the estrangement, when you stare into the mirror and wonder who you're looking at, don't look away too quickly. Instead of checking for flaws, look for stories. The nights you endured, the laughter that carried you, the battles no one applauded but you survived anyway. Those stories are etched into you, and they are more real than any reflection. Your reflection will always shift. That's the nature of light, memory, and change. But beneath the surface metrics, something steadier holds. Your resilience, your curiosity, your will to keep showing up. These don't wrinkle, these don't blur with bad lighting. They are the core you. So the next time your reflection startles you, soften your gaze. Not to fix, not to judge, but to listen. Because that face, whether familiar or strange, isn't a stranger at all. It's a witness, a survivor, a becoming. And maybe recognition doesn't mean instantly knowing. Maybe it means giving yourself the grace to rediscover, again and again, who you already are. That gentle recognition, the quiet yes to your own existence, might be the truest way of coming home to yourself. The hidden power of a yawn. How our brains secretly sync with others. Think about the last time you saw someone yawn. You probably didn't need to be tired, yet your jaw loosened, your eyes blinked, and your body shifted almost without permission. It wasn't something you decided to do, it just happened. What seems like a small reflex actually reveals something far bigger about the human mind. Our brains are constantly linked, tuned, and reshaped by the people around us. A yawn is more than boredom or low oxygen intake, it's a signal of how interconnected we truly are. Scientists call this contagious yawning, but that term doesn't capture the depth of what's happening. What's really at play is neural resonance, the subtle way our nervous systems synchronize. Think of it as being inside a choir you didn't know you joined. One person yawns and it's as if a hidden frequency passes through the room. Suddenly, your brain state adjusts, not because you copied them consciously, but because your biology felt their inner state. It's empathy written into reflex. The idea that we influence one another at such a basic level unsettles the illusion that consciousness is sealed inside our own heads. We like to think our thoughts and emotions are private, but biology proves otherwise. The architecture of empathy runs on specialized cells called mirror neurons. These are the ghostly echoes of other people's actions and feelings inside your brain. When someone smiles, your brain lights up as if you smiled. When they frown, your face subtly tenses. And when they yawn, your arousal systems recalibrate. It's less about mimicry and more about alignment, a quiet, "I feel you," whispered from one nervous system to another. What's fascinating is that scientists still don't fully agree on why we yawn. Theories include brain cooling, oxygen regulation, or preparing for state transitions like sleep and wakefulness. But none of these explanations capture why yawns spread socially. That's where empathy comes in. Contagious yawning is strongest among people with higher levels of empathy, and even animals show this effect. Chimpanzees yawn when their companions do, and dogs will often yawn after watching their owners. That means yawning isn't just about fatigue, it's about connection. Pause and think about that for a moment. Your dog may not understand your words, but when they catch your yawn, they're mirroring your internal state. It's a bond older than language, a shared rhythm between species. If something as ordinary as a yawn carries this hidden thread of empathy, What else are we overlooking in our daily interactions? Consider posture, laughter, size, or even subtle shifts in breathing. Your brain is always scanning these signals and adjusting. Sit in a room full of anxious people and you'll feel your chest tighten. Share space with someone who is calm, and your heart rate slows. We often believe emotions are private experiences, but in reality, they ripple outward, bouncing between bodies like invisible signals. Your nervous system is porous by design. It listens, it synchronizes, it responds. This realization changes how we think about individuality. Modern culture emphasizes self-control, independence, and the idea that your emotions are yours alone. But contagious yawning undermines that. The truth is, we are social organisms built for synchrony. Even when we resist it, our biology reaches out, adjusting us moment by moment to those around us. Imagine a dark room filled with unlit candles. One flame appears, and gradually, light spreads from wick to wick. That's how yawning works, not with fire, but with awareness. It reminds us that consciousness is not a solitary flame but a shared field. And here's the twist. The more empathetic you are, the more likely you are to catch that flame. That means sensitivity isn't weakness, it's evidence of how tuned you are to the hidden orchestra of human presence. Now, why does this matter? Because it shows that our most automatic behaviors carry deep meaning. In a society obsessed with performance, social media personas, curated appearances, carefully chosen words, yawning remains raw, unpolished, and universal. It happens in classrooms, funerals, business meetings, or late-night talks. It doesn't care about culture or status. It bypasses ego and reminds us of the raw biology underneath. And when you really consider this, it becomes almost spiritual. A yawn is like a breath shared, a silent acknowledgement that we are here together. Two nervous systems aligning for a moment, without words or conscious effort. That's intimacy at its most stripped-down connection hidden inside reflex. The implications stretch further. If yawns can shift brain states, imagine what constant exposure to emotions does. Research shows that witnessing pain activates your own pain centers. Watching someone succeed boosts your dopamine. Even observing relaxation can lower cortisol in your body. Your mind is a social sponge, shaped continuously by others. Consciousness is less a solo act and more a choir where each voice changes the harmony. Animals give us clues about how deep this goes. Birds have been observed catching yawns from one another. Dogs synchronize their yawns with owners, but more interestingly, they do it most with owners they are bonded to. That means emotional contagion isn't just about biology, it's about relationship, about closeness. It suggests empathy predates civilization, maybe even language itself. Long before humans developed words, our bodies already spoke through yawns, sighs, and mirrored gestures. That's why I think of yawning as one of the last honest behaviors. It can't be faked convincingly, it doesn't serve a social image, and yet it spreads faster than many spoken messages. It reveals that no matter how much we isolate ourselves behind screens, our biology still reaches out, searching for resonance. So next time you're in a room and someone yawns, don't brush it off. Recognize that your nervous system just received a signal, and your brain answered back. It wasn't laziness, it was connection. In that second, two minds aligned without negotiation or thought. In a world that often feels fragmented, that's a reminder we're never as separate as we imagine. When you catch yourself yawning with someone else, see it for what it really is. A small act of biological empathy, a quiet harmony, a whisper from your nervous system saying, you're not alone. And maybe that's the deepest meaning of contagious yawning. Not weakness, not boredom, but evidence that even in silence, even in reflex, our brains are designed to join, to connect, to belong. The cosmic error. Why our universe might be an accident that learned to exist. What if the world you experience every day, your thoughts, your memories, the sky you look at every night isn't the result of some perfectly orchestrated design, but more like the fallout of a cosmic accident? Picture yourself in an endless museum with billions of rooms. Inside each room is the same sculpture, but in slightly different forms, some cracked, some distorted, some shimmering with impossible beauty. You happen to walk into one room not because it was the most perfect, but because the door simply opened there. That's your universe. This idea, unsettling as it sounds, is not just poetic speculation. Physics, cosmology, and even biology hint at the possibility that reality itself may be less a masterpiece of precision and more like a typo that accidentally works. For centuries, humans have described the cosmos as a kind of cathedral of order, governed by symmetry, precision, and finely tuned mathematical laws. The deeper we study, the more elegance we find in equations like Einstein's relativity or the framework of quantum mechanics. Yet, lurking inside those equations are cracks, places where logic collapses, infinities appear, and the math screams back at us in protest. Consider the Big Bang. Our scientific narrative often begins there, but in truth, the Big Bang itself is not a smooth origin. It comes from a singularity, a point where density becomes infinite and the known laws of physics fail entirely. In computing, when a program encounters a divide by zero, the whole system crashes. Cosmology starts with one of those crashes and calls it the beginning of time. What could be more bizarre than that? Even stranger, our universe appears fine-tuned for life. If the electron's mass were a tiny fraction different, atoms wouldn't form. If gravity were stronger or weaker by the smallest degree, stars could never ignite or galaxies would tear apart. If dark energy were slightly altered, the cosmos would either collapse back in on itself or expand so violently that no structure could form. These conditions appear to balance on a razor's edge. Traditional explanations appeal to the anthropic principle, the idea that we see this universe because it's one of the few capable of supporting observers like us. But there's a darker possibility. Maybe most universes fail, maybe almost all reality is chaos, and we just happen to land in a cosmic error that accidentally worked. Like a broken clock that still manages to tell the right time once in a while, our universe may simply be good enough, not perfect. Imagine a colossal machine churning out universes like lottery tickets. Trillions of attempts produce dead ends, failed starts where physics can't hold together, where matter never coheres, where time collapses back in on itself. But eventually, against the odds, one number sequence aligns. One universe survives long enough to form atoms, then stars, then planets, then life. Not because it was meant to, but because chance demands that even errors sometimes yield strange successes. If you're alive to notice it, you are living inside that one outlier, a statistical fluke that shouldn't exist but somehow does. You, in a sense, are the flower blooming from a glitch in the system. Quantum mechanics adds another layer of unease. At the smallest scales, particles don't exist in fixed states until measured. Before observation, they are probability waves, smeared across possibilities. Conscious interaction seems to collapse them into reality. It's as though existence itself flickers between possibility and actuality, stabilized only when entangled with awareness. Now imagine that this observer-dependent universe wasn't the intended rule but a corrupted feature in the operating code of reality. What if consciousness itself is a malfunction, an emergent artifact born from instability? Perhaps awareness was never supposed to exist, yet through some logical hiccup, it flickered into being like a visual glitch on a corrupted screen that accidentally creates an image. Biology reflects this same theme. DNA is often described as the code of life, but it is a messy one. Our genomes are riddled with redundancies, broken sequences, and mutations. Vast stretches of non-coding DNA sit like junk data, remnants of past errors and evolutionary accidents. Evolution itself is not a path of elegant design, but a stumbling improvisation where countless species go extinct, while a few manage to adapt by accident. Even our brains, the seat of thought, are hardly flawless machines. They hallucinate stability, invent meaning, and misfire constantly. Our memories distort. Our perceptions are biased. Our emotions swing wildly. Yet somehow, despite this chaos, the brain functions just well enough to keep us alive and self-aware. Consciousness may not be the polished software of a divine engineer, but the glitchy operating system of survival. Zoom back to the cosmic scale. What emerges is not a picture of a pristine cathedral but of a cosmic junkyard. Most universes may be rusting wrecks. Most possibilities collapse into nothing. But in the darkness, one light bulb flickers and holds just long enough to cast shadows on the wall. That flicker, that improbable survival, is our universe. And here we are, staring at it, confusing its accidental stability for design. This way of thinking is sometimes called the cosmic error theory. It proposes that existence may not be optimized, chosen, or purposeful, but simply possible. Given enough trials, possibility itself eventually produces something that mimics intention. And while that sounds bleak, it is strangely liberating. If you are the result of a cosmic typo, if the universe was never supposed to stabilize yet somehow did, then every moment is doubly miraculous. Every sunrise is an accident that insisted on beauty. Every laugh, every song, every connection is noise that found rhythm. You are not meaningless. You are improbably real, but this perspective also forces us to confront something uncomfortable, our craving for purpose. Humans are storytellers by nature. We want arcs, heroes, villains, beginnings, and endings. We organize chaos into coherence because our minds cannot stand the void of randomness. But maybe the truest form of courage is to live fully in a world that may not have a script. Maybe the noblest human act is to carve meaning out of accident, to create order not because it was given to us, but because we chose to write it into being. Consider this. If the universe is a bug, then we are its poetry. If life is an accident, then it is the most extraordinary accident imaginable, one that produced mathematics, music, love, and memory. Whether existence was engineered or stumbled into being does not change the reality that you are here, thinking, wondering, hoping. The stars still shine. Neurons still fire. Silence still hums with potential. And if this is all the product of a cosmic error, then perhaps that is the most profound kind of beauty, that from broken logic and infinite chaos arose a reality capable of contemplating itself. So the next time you feel overwhelmed by the sheer improbability of it all, remember this. You're not here because the universe was perfect. You are here because chaos, given enough tries, accidentally produced a version of reality stable enough to dream. And that dream, improbable as it is, became you.